Maybe that mild-mannered dude in the corner was really the big bad guy. Perhaps the hero was dead the whole time. Or maybe everything we've seen is somebody's hallucination. Whatever the reveal, these memorable movie moments caught us off guard and left us talking for years to come. Spoilers ahead. Usually movies are told in chronological order, but much like its protagonist, Dr. Louise Banks, Arrival isn't confined to a single time. In the movie's opening, we watch Louise lose her beloved daughter to disease. Naturally, we assume this is happening early in her life, well before the renowned linguist is asked by the military to communicate with the heptapods, mysterious aliens who've landed on Earth. Her job is to translate their complex language so humans can talk with these otherworldly visitors. As she delves deeper into their circular alphabet, though, the heptapod language changes her perspective of time, allowing her to experience the past, present, and future at once. Before long, we discover that Louise actually hasn't had her child yet. Those flashbacks are actually flash-forwards, visions of what's to come, courtesy of the alien language. Louise now exists outside of time, or more accurately, throughout every moment simultaneously. As a result, her perspective on concepts like love are radically altered by the heptapod's gift. Sure, she now knows that heartbreak is coming, but she heads into the future anyway, because she knows there's a lot of joy waiting there too. It might just be the most emotional twist in all of science fiction, and one that will leave you both thinking and wiping away a few tears. A Beautiful Mind finds an Oscar-nominated Russell Crowe playing John Nash, a real-life Nobel Prize-winning mathematician who lived a rather unusual life. Early in the film, Nash is drafted by Department of Defense agent William Parcher to analyze magazines and newspapers for hidden Russian codes.
You are, quite simply, the best natural code breaker I have ever seen.
It's an intense assignment, but when he's not engaged in high-stakes espionage, John seems to lead a normal life with a supportive wife and an incredibly close BFF, Charles. Whenever Charles shows up to visit, he brings along his adorable niece, Marcy, who always brings a smile to John's face. Unfortunately, of the four most important people in John's life, only one of them is actually a living, breathing human being. In reality, John is suffering from paranoid schizophrenia, and the incredibly creepy Parcher is just a hallucination. There are no secret messages, no Soviet spies lurking in the shadows, and no radium implanted in his arm. The real blow, however, is that Charles and Marcy are also products of his imagination. Unless you know the true story, the twist comes as a devastating surprise and sends this Academy Award-winning film in a disturbing direction. Colossal is one of the strangest movies ever made. This fantasy flick finds Anne Hathaway as the alcoholic Gloria, recently single and moving back to her hometown. But as the self-destructive woman soon discovers, her problems are a lot bigger than just the bottle. Gloria is psychically linked to a giant Godzilla-like monster, and whenever she stumbles across a particular playground, the kaiju mysteriously appears in the city of Seoul, South Korea.
What is he doing?
It's dancing.
Is dancing like...
Fortunately, Gloria has a good friend to help with all the booze and oversized beasts. Jason Sudeikis plays her childhood friend, a nice guy named Oscar. The moment Gloria comes back to town, Oscar does everything he can to help her feel at home. He gives her furniture for her empty house, builds her up with all sorts of compliments, and even gives her a job working at his bar, which is probably not the best place for an alcoholic to work. But then Gloria realizes there's a lot of darkness behind Oscar's winning smile. For one, he's also linked to another giant creature that appears in the South Korean capital. And while he pretends to be a good dude, we quickly learn he's a violent, manipulative control freak, more monstrous than any kaiju. And when Gloria tries to get away from this creep, he threatens to murder countless Koreans with his robot avatar.
Either you drink that beer, or I'll go take a walk through the park later.
This turn from best friend to abuser is pretty shocking, largely thanks to Sudeikis' affable persona. That said, there were probably a lot of women who saw this coming, well aware that the real world is full of Oscars. One of the most unsettling sci-fi movies ever made, Ex Machina finds a mild-mannered computer programmer named Caleb winning the contest of a lifetime. He's been picked to spend a week conducting a bizarre Turing test with his billionaire boss Nathan, played here by a super creepy show-stealing Oscar Isaac. A brilliant inventor, Nathan has created an artificial intelligence named Ava, and he wants to see if his creation can convince Caleb she's a sentient being. Caleb quickly falls under Ava's spell, and soon the programmer plans to free his crush from Nathan's grasp.
Do you have people who test you or might switch you off?
No, I
Then
don't.
why do I?
After all, the tech tycoon has her locked up and plans on essentially killing her. Plus, Nathan's interest in Ava isn't just scientific. This guy has a thing for building female robots that he can imprison and control. Using his own tech savvy, Caleb sets Ava free, and seconds later, the liberated android slices through Nathan like he's a pat of hot butter. If this was your typical sci-fi flick, Ava and Caleb would probably run off together. But in Ex Machina, things take a hard left turn when Ava locks up Caleb and leaves the screaming programmer to die of starvation. It's a gut punch of an ending, especially since Caleb seems so sympathetic. Sadly, there's a good chance that he would have jeopardized her shot at freedom in the outside world. In the end, he had to be tested and switched off after all. It's no surprise that the Armitage family are the bad guys in Get Out. When Missy Armitage and her husband Dean first meet our everyman hero, Chris Washington, they're way too friendly and far too polite, which is never a good sign in a horror movie.
By the way, I would have voted for Obama for a third term if I could. Best president in my lifetime, hands down. I agree.
Then there's their super creepy son Jeremy, who's oozing with menace whenever he comes slinking onto the screen. But with all these racists surrounding poor Chris, his girlfriend Rose seems totally on his side. She'll definitely help him escape her family's clutches, right? Unfortunately, Rose is probably the most evil member of the entire family. After finding a box of incriminating photos, Chris starts to realize he's the victim of some really cruel catfishing, but he still desperately hopes that Rose is on his side when the Armitage clan blocks his path. He begs Rose to give him the car keys so he can escape, and for a moment, it seems like she might pick her boyfriend over her own flesh and blood. She doesn't.
Where are those keys, Rose?
You know I can't give you the keys, right, babe?
The casting here is what makes the twist work so well. According to both Allison Williams and director Jordan Peele, Williams was cast because audiences would associate her with the far less evil roles that she'd played before. Sure enough, she does indeed seem pretty harmless, right up until she doesn't. Messing around with creepy European cults is never a good idea. That's a lesson our murderous anti-hero learns the hard way in Ben Wheatley's Kill List. This disturbing horror film is centered around Jay, a family man whose marriage has fallen on hard times. And oh yeah, he makes his living as a hired killer. You've got to put food on the table somehow, and Jay stands to make a tidy paycheck by killing 3 people for a mysterious client who wants his contract signed in blood. The weird thing is, the targets don't behave like typical victims. Instead of begging for their lives, they actually thank Jay when he shows up for some hammer time. Things go from eerie to straight up hellish when Jay tries to kill his 3rd victim. Instead of finding his target, he stumbles into a cult right out of The Wicker Man. The whole assassination scheme was part of an elaborate occult ritual, and it comes to a bloody end when the pagans capture Jay, put a mask over his face, and force him to fight a cloaked hunchback. The assassin makes short work of his opponent, but after turning this guy into a shish kebab, Jay discovers a horrific truth. The hunchback is really his wife and son, kidnapped by the cult and tied together with his son on his wife's back. Jay just murdered his own family, much to the delight of the deranged cult, capping off a ghastly film with a truly gruesome ending. Bong Joon-ho's Mother has a pretty standard plot for a murder mystery. A mentally challenged young man is accused of murdering a teenage girl. The police don't have any solid evidence against him, but they need to make an arrest, so they toss the disabled man in jail and trick him into confessing. Needless to say, his devoted mother knows her son is innocent, and she goes from a mild-mannered widow to South Korea's Sherlock Holmes, chasing down leads, interrogating suspects, and putting together a case to free her son from jail. She even discovers a possible scheme involving blackmail and a mysterious old man. Now, in your typical murder mystery, the mom would discover the killer's true identity and clear her kid's name. However, Mother subverts all those expectations when the titular mom makes a simple but shocking discovery. Her son really did it. Yeah, he's a sweet kid, and yes, he's mentally disabled, but that didn't stop him from caving in a girl's head. It's a smart little twist that gets even twistier when the mom murders an eyewitness to protect her son. Mother spins every thriller trope on its head, but it also goes to show that nobody loves you like your mother. Every knife-wielding villain in a horror movie has a special talent for taking out their victims when they least expect it. But Ghostface, the sinister slasher from 1996's Scream, seems like he could pop up anywhere at any time. When the masked killer first arrives in the opening scene after terrorizing poor Drew Barrymore over the phone, he seems to be lurking around every single corner. There's no way anyone can move this quickly, but as victim after victim learns, there's no getting away from Ghostface. This dude is everywhere.
Please don't kill me, Mr. Ghostface. I want to be in the sequel.
In the big climax of Wes Craven's horror classic, we discover the secret behind Ghostface's teleporting powers. Final girl Sidney Prescott is running for her life. The mass murderer has shown up at a high school party, and he's slicing people left and right. Sidney has no clue who's under the mask, and we have plenty of suspects. Ghostface could be boyfriend Billy, horror movie fan Randy, goofball Stu, or even Sidney's own dad. There are so many suspects, and it's impossible to know who to trust. And that's when Sidney makes a horrific discovery. Her boyfriend Billy is Ghostface, and so is his best bud Stu. These two psychos are working together for a maximum kill count and providing each other with an alibi.
Movies don't create psychos. Movies make psychos more creative.
With two guys running around wearing Ghostface masks, it's no wonder this bad guy was making such good time. M. Night Shyamalan's extremely weird filmography has made him a punchline for many moviegoers, but he'll always have one indisputable claim to fame. He made The Sixth Sense, an all-time great horror movie with possibly the most famous twist in cinematic history. The film finds Bruce Willis playing Dr. Malcolm Crowe, an award-winning child psychologist. In the opening scene, he's shot by a disturbed patient he couldn't save, but a couple of months later, Crowe is walking around and seems perfectly okay. Well, his marriage is falling apart and his wife won't acknowledge his existence, so that isn't great. But at least he gets a chance at redemption by helping Cole Sear, a troubled boy who can, well, you know.
I see dead people.
However, Cole isn't the only one who can see spirits. The audience has been looking at a dead guy since the start of the movie. After trying so hard to talk to his wife, Crowe finally realizes why she won't respond. He's a ghost. That gunshot in the beginning of the film was actually fatal, and he's been a dead man walking ever since, despite never realizing it himself. It was an ending that sent shockwaves through Hollywood, and Shyamalan has been trying to recapture that glory ever since. But while a film or two has come close, The Sixth Sense still stands supreme as the perfect Shyamalan twist. Everybody knows the twist from The Empire Strikes Back. Even moviegoers who have never seen a single Star Wars movie know Darth Vader is actually Luke Skywalker's dad. The twist has permeated the pop culture consciousness and given us one of the most memorable and misquoted lines of all time.
La la la, Luke, I am your father.
Back in 1980, however, the Luke Vader revelation absolutely floored Star Wars fans. Most of the cast and crew didn't even know the truth about Luke's family tree. According to Mark Hamill, the original script read differently.
The way we filmed it, Vader said, "You don't know the truth. Obi-Wan killed your father."
Famously, only Hamill, James Earl Jones, George Lucas, and director Irvin Kershner were aware of the twist. So when Vader finally announced his parentage, everybody was gasping, from audiences to the actors themselves. And this shocking moment did a whole lot more than elicit gasps. The Dad Vader reveal sent the series in a completely new direction and laid the groundwork for countless additional Star Wars films. Has any other movie twist had such an enormous impact? The Last Jedi is one of the twistiest chapters in the entire Star Wars franchise. We learn that Rey's parents are nobodies, Big Bad Snoke gets cut in half, Luke was a Force-induced illusion the whole time. It's twist after crazy twist, but the biggest shock comes early in the film when Luke Skywalker reveals his Jedi days are done. To set the scene, we have to go back to a long time ago to 2015, when The Force Awakens was teasing audiences with the promise of Luke Skywalker. It had been over 30 years since fans had seen the beloved Jedi Knight, and the entire premise of Episode 7 involved a group of heroes searching for the legendary warrior. Finally, at the end of the film, Rey finds the bearded Skywalker standing on a majestic cliff. As that John Williams music starts to swell, Rey hands the Jedi his long-lost lightsaber, and that's where the film ends, with Rey reaching out to the hooded silent hero. Audiences had to wait 2 whole years to see what would happen, but obviously, Luke was going to take the lightsaber and lead the charge against the First Order, right? Not exactly. In the years since we last saw him, Luke has turned his back on the Force and wants the Jedi to die out. This little twist flew in the face of fans' expectations, but really, they should have listened when Yoda told us all those years ago that the Jedi were never meant to be great warriors. If Terry Gilliam, Karl Marx, Spike Lee, and Rod Serling all teamed up to make a movie, it might look like Sorry to Bother You. Written and directed by Boots Riley, this movie is absolutely insane in all the right ways, and no description can do it justice. It is without a doubt the most anti-capitalist film to ever come out of Hollywood, and it features perhaps the most deranged twist of the 21st century so far. The plot follows a promising young telemarketer named Cassius Cash Green, who finds success in sales by smooth-talking his customers using what the film calls his white voice.
Like this young blood.
Hey, Mr. Kramer, this is Langston from Regal View. I didn't catch you at the wrong time, did I?
Soon, Cash is promoted to the big time, which involves selling slaves to giant companies, and eventually he crosses paths with a psycho billionaire played by Armie Hammer, with big plans for the future of business. Up until this point, the movie has been incredibly weird, but when Cash discovers the billionaire's plans, the film absolutely loses its mind. As it turns out, the billionaire is turning people into half-human, half-horse monsters, so he can create a powerful but malleable workforce. That's right, Armie Hammer is turning people into horses. And if that wasn't wild enough, the movie ends with Cash suddenly turning into an equestrian himself. It's totally bonkers, and no matter how good you are at guessing twists, you'll never see this nightmare coming. From the Mandarin reveal in Iron Man 3 to the Thanos snap in Infinity War, the MCU had its fair share of shocking twists. One of its most jaw-dropping moments, however, comes in Spider-Man Homecoming, when Peter Parker picks up his date for the homecoming dance and finds something way more intimidating than the average suburban dad. Throughout this superhero flick, the wall crawler is trying to find a balance between homework and crime fighting, hanging out with friends and trading punches with bad guys. You can't really go to parties or participate in the academic decathlon when you've got an entire neighborhood to protect. And it's hard to get a date when you're constantly trying to fight the Vulture, a winged thief who sells weapons made with alien technology to local thugs. Eventually, Peter puts his crime fighting on pause and works up the nerve to ask his crush, Liz Allen, to the dance. He gets his suit, learns to dance, buys Liz a nice corsage, and shows up at her house ready for a fun evening. That's when the door opens to reveal the Vulture himself. As it turns out, this murderous villain just so happens to be Liz's father. Suddenly, Peter isn't worried about making a good impression. He's just worried about making it through the night alive, which becomes even more difficult when the Vulture realizes why Peter's acting even more nervous than the usual high school kid meeting his girlfriend's father.
Very lucky that he was there that day.
Good old Spider-Man.
Like Uncle Ben always used to say, with great power comes a really complicated love life. If you're one of the millions of people who saw Avengers Infinity War on opening weekend, chances are you've got some questions about what you've just watched and what's going to happen next. But more than anything, you probably want to know about that one moment no one saw coming. You know the one. The good news is, if you're ready to dive into the nitty-gritty of the movie and its many connections to the comics, there's no reason to wait any longer. Let's get to it. Do we even need to say spoilers ahead?
Ready? Let's go.
As we see in Infinity War, Thanos forces Gamora to take him to the Soul Stone after she's forced to reveal its location on the planet Vormir. There, the pair find that the keeper of the stone is our old pal, the Red Skull, who seemed to meet his demise when he was sucked into the Tesseract itself, aka the Space Stone, and then shot into outer space in the first Captain America movie. He might look a little different when he shows up in Infinity War, of course, since Hugo Weaving didn't return to play the character and was instead portrayed by The Walking Dead's Ross Marquand, but it's still definitely the Skull. So what's he doing all the way out on Vormir? Red Skull explains that he was cast out by the Space Stone and imprisoned on Vormir, doomed to lead others to the Soul Stone without ever being able to use it himself. In the comics, of course, Red Skull's relationship with the Infinity Stones isn't really a thing, but he does have a lot of history with the Cosmic Cube, an item with similar powers to the MCU's Tesseract. However, the Infinity Stones are not related to the comics' Cosmic Cube. Say that 5 times fast. Red Skull is one of Captain America's most frequent comic book foes, and although the hero has vanquished him time and time again, he uses the Cosmic Cube to come back from the dead, transform into and possess people, and travel through time. But in the MCU, the Space Stone was his jam, and now we know that he isn't even connected to that anymore. Now he just guards the Soul Stone, the only one of the 6 Infinity Stones that uses its owner, rather than letting its owner use it. So what's it all mean? Why would we see the Red Skull in this scene at all? Well, it may be foreshadowing. You know that there are a lot of people who kick the bucket in the end, thanks to Thanos' supreme snap. Some of those people, including Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and Black Panther, are expected to have more than just one standalone project on the MCU film slate, so mourning those losses seems premature to say the least. Meanwhile, the Soul Stone in the comics tends to capture its wielder and contain the souls of others within it, in a place called Soul World. So it's possible that the Red Skull wasn't trapped on Vormir to guard the stone. Instead, he may be one of the stone's prisoners. After all, the Red Skull's been there for decades. He should be dead, but the Soul Stone has kept him alive this whole time. So maybe some of the other characters who seem to die in Infinity War have been kept alive by the Soul Stone too. This could potentially answer the question of how some of the many superheroes who bit the dust in the film could be brought back in time for the fourth movie. Could those who were snapped out of existence all be residing in the Soul World now? There are other ways the fourth Avengers film could bring back those lost heroes, of course, especially since the Time Stone was proven to be able to do exactly that by Thanos himself. But if the Russo brothers are looking to surprise some folks with a more unexpected resurrection, well, the Red Skull's guardianship of the Soul Stone might have just laid the groundwork for exactly that.
Wow.
Move over, Doctor Strange. There's a new sorcerer in town.
We're all gonna die!
The MCU's Peter Parker may feel like he has the weight of the world on his shoulders, but at least he has a few good friends watching his back. Peter's friend Ned proves to be exceptionally useful in the Holland-led threequel, Spider-Man No Way Home. It's not just his intelligence that helps Peter conquer the day. In this movie, it's his magical hands. Literally. Ned must have some sorcerers somewhere in his family tree, because once he attains a sling ring, the device Doctor Strange uses to create portals, he's able to use it all on his own, doing it just about perfectly on his first try. To say this comes in handy in the movie is a pretty major understatement. Matter of fact, his sorcery directly leads to the movie's coolest moments. It's safe to say hardly anyone had Ned becomes a sorcerer on their Spider-Man No Way Home bingo card, but that's precisely what we got. At the very least, Ned becomes incredibly proficient at using a sling ring in a short amount of time. Whereas it took Stephen Strange quite a while to get the hang of making portals, Peter Parker's right-hand man figures out how to do it almost immediately, although he apparently still needs to learn how not to immediately close them after somebody walks through. It's a fun addition to the Spider-Man canon and plays a significant role in several moments throughout the film. The most notable instance of Ned's sling ring proficiency coming in handy is when he and MJ want to find their Peter. But when he merely says Peter Parker, we get Andrew Garfield's version of the character and then Tobey Maguire's.
Pizza time.
It's a fun way to bring all of the Spider-Men into one place. However, whether Ned's set to join the ranks of the sorcerers himself in the future is still very much up in the air. During the heart-wrenching No Way Home finale, Holland's Peter asks Doctor Strange to make everyone in the universe forget about Peter Parker. He doesn't merely ask to make people forget Peter is Spider-Man, he asks that Strange wipe out his existence from people's memories completely. That means Ned forgets all of his memories of Peter too. By that logic, it would make sense for him also to forget he can tap into magical powers. Who knows if he'll ever remember the power he holds in the palm of his hands. Ned being a magic user isn't just a fun thing they added to Ned's character for the movies. His character's namesake from the comics, Ned Leeds, has a villainous alter ego as one version of the Hobgoblin, one who's also proficient in sorcery. This is exemplified in the storyline for symbiote Spider-Man, Alien Reality. In it, Ned, aka Hobgoblin, decides to work alongside Baron Mordo, who's played by Chiwetel Ejiofor in the MCU. Hobgoblin steals a magic book at the Sanctum Sanctorum called the Word of God, which allows the user to alter the universe. Through this, Hobgoblin's able to make Mordo the Sorcerer Supreme, while Ned becomes his apprentice. Suffice to say, nothing like that happens in No Way Home. While Ned learns how to use some magic, it's limited to making portals via a sling ring. He doesn't go full evil just yet, but there is a line to suggest Ned could become Hobgoblin down the road. After Tom Holland's Peter Parker meets the other two, Tobey Maguire's version tells Ned about how he fought his own best friend, Harry Osborn.
Look at little Goblin Jr. Gonna cry?
The story seems to really stick with Ned, and he immediately turns to Tom Holland's Spider-Man to inform him that he'll never turn evil and fight him. It's a fun line, especially for those who are aware of Ned's comic book alter ego. And with Baron Mordo returning to the MCU with a villainous role in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, who knows what could transpire? Perhaps the two characters will meet one day in the MCU, after all.
You're an FOS now, friend of Spider-Man, and you have to remember, just stay calm.
From surprise ghosts to vengeful spouses and a whole lot of doppelgangers, these movies delivered the most shocking twists we've ever seen. This goes without saying, but spoilers ahead.
It's us.
2 years after terrifying audiences with Get Out, Jordan Peele frightened everyone again with Us, a freakish horror film with a genuinely shocking ending. The film opens in 1986 when a young Adelaide Thomas wanders into a hall of mirrors and meets her diabolical doppelganger. Flash forward a couple of decades, and adult Adelaide is confronting her evil twin yet again. Only this time, the doppelganger, known as Red, has brought an army of scissor-wielding clones up from their underground lair, with each assigned to kill their real-world counterpart. Throughout the film, Adelaide and her family manage to outwit and defeat their doubles, and in the climactic sequence, our hero finally confronts her twisted doppelganger. But in a stunning flashback, we suddenly realize we might be rooting for the wrong person. As it turns out, Adelaide is actually the grinning doppelganger from the opening scene. When she encountered the real Adelaide in the funhouse, she strangled the girl unconscious, dragged her into an underworld of mute monsters, and then took the real Adelaide's place. So Adelaide is really Red, and Red is the real Adelaide. And this whole creepy scheme has been about getting revenge for having her life taken away. Ultimately, the twist works as commentary on issues like privilege and nature versus nurture. But in the moment, all you can really think about is picking your jaw up off the floor. The twist ending of The Usual Suspects is almost more famous than the movie itself. The entire film is narrated by Verbal Kint, sole survivor of a heist gone wrong. Verbal is a timid thug who suffers from cerebral palsy, and as he's being interrogated by customs agent Dave Kuyan, Verbal spins a story of how he and his crew were drafted by the world's most notorious criminal, an underworld boogeyman named Kaiser Sose. As Verbal tells his crazy story, Kuyan suspects Verbal's BFF, Dean Keaton, was secretly Sose, and that he betrayed all his buddies during their bloody caper. Convinced he's solved the crime, he lets Verbal walk and takes a minute to revel in his detective skills. And that's when he notices the bulletin board. Shocked, Kuyan realizes that Verbal's story was complete nonsense, and that he assembled his wild tale by pulling keywords and details from the papers and wanted posters tacked on the wall. And as Kuyan figures out he let a guilty man walk free, we see Verbal Kint morph into a new man. His limp disappears, his gnarled hand straightens out, and he starts walking with the confidence of a crook who beat the system for the millionth time. This little nobody is actually Kaiser Sose, and then, like that, he's gone. It might be the greatest trick a movie's ever pulled, and it's a kind of twist that will make you drop your coffee mug in shock. Even with hits like Memories of Murder and Snowpiercer already under his belt, Bong Joon-ho stunned audiences with Parasite, a subtle examination of the relationship between one family that has nothing, the Kims, and another that has everything, the Parks. After a friend of the young Ki-woo invites him to lie his way into the wealthy Park home to act as a tutor, Ki-woo goes one step further by getting his entire family jobs. This quickly spins a web of deception that we sense won't end well, but it's a carefully calculated deterioration of everyone's lives that makes the film the wild ride it is. Parasite is full of commentary on the toxicity of the super rich, but the societal con that sees underprivileged people fighting each other for scraps is a glue that holds the whole mess together. When the Kims begin feeling confident in the Park family's dependency, they have an audacious living room gathering while the family is away. While we expect them to be found out by the Parks, what actually happens is even more jarring. Moon Guan, whose life they ruined by getting her fired to protect their own deceit, returns, begging to be let inside. We discover she's been keeping her husband in the basement of the Park family home for years, unknown to the Parks. This is just one of the developments that signifies imminent disaster for all, and is one of the most surprising moments in a film full of reveals. Marion Crane yearns to settle down with her boyfriend Sam, but his debts are preventing them from finding happiness together. Stealing the money he needs from her job and going on the lam, she's forced to take overnight refuge at the isolated Bates Motel. There she meets what she assumes to be an overall harmless weirdo named Norman Bates, who shows her to her room. Sadly, Marion has caught the attention of his mother, Norma. Marion will never leave the hotel, while Norman is forced to cover for his mother's crimes. Psycho is easily one of director Alfred Hitchcock's most notorious thrillers, and even decades later, it's easy to see why. Though best remembered for its more shocking scenes, those only succeed due to the incredible tension building of the quieter moments. Sure, it's terrifying that women are going missing at this mysterious hotel on a lonely highway, but relaxed moments where Norman Bates casually explains his interest in taxidermy are arguably more frightening, if only in retrospect. Still, Psycho has two major twists, with the first being the surprise death of Marion, the film's point of view character, within the first half hour. Additionally, the reveal that Norman's mother has been dead all along and that Norman is channeling her in his own mind is still scary today. Friday the 13th has a unique place in film history, being an independent production that gained major distribution at a time when that was essentially unheard of. Not only spawning a huge franchise in its own right, but also helping to herald a new era of slashers. Friday the 13th is sometimes referred to as a surface-level response to Halloween, but there's a fair amount of social commentary at play in the script. Though it would be a stretch to call it nuanced, the lack of accountability at summer camps during the time is a catalyst for much of what occurs, as is the cruelty and neglect towards a disabled boy named Jason Voorhees that it allows. Though we're told that Jason drowned in the lake, the heavy boots and bulky jacket of the masked killer lead us to believe that he continues to stalk the campgrounds, killing the new teen counselors. However, it turns out that Pamela Voorhees is in fact the killer, seeking vengeance for her son's horrible death. Even if this is seldom mentioned in the franchise's many sequels, it is nonetheless a part of horror history.
Name the killer in Friday the 13th.
Jason! Jason!
I'm sorry. That's the wrong answer.
Years down the line, this twist is used as a gotcha in the opening sequence of Scream, in which the doomed Casey Becker desperately insists that the killer in Friday the 13th was Jason, only to be rudely corrected that it was in fact Mrs. Voorhees in the first film. In Miguel's home, music is banned due to his great-grandmother Imelda having been abandoned by a wayward musician many years before. The daughter of this tryst, Coco, is Miguel's elderly grandmother, her life having been in many ways decided by her father's disappearance. Miguel has a natural knack for music, but his responsibility to his family weighs heavily upon him. Idolizing the musician Ernesto de la Cruz, Miguel becomes convinced that Ernesto was his great-grandfather. This leads Miguel to announce his intention to become a musician, but his grandmother wrecks his guitar. Obtaining Ernesto's mythical guitar, Miguel gains the ability to converse with his dead relatives. Miguel forms an alliance with a ghost named Hector, renouncing his great-grandmother's blessings in favor of finding Ernesto. Though Ernesto initially welcomes Miguel as family, his deceptions are soon revealed. Indeed, Hector was actually Miguel's great-grandfather all along, and he only abandoned his family because he was poisoned to death by his jealous musical partner Ernesto. Naturally, this leads to a bittersweet conclusion, with Hector finally honored for his musical genius and reunited with Imelda and Coco, albeit in the land of the dead. The family ends the ban against music, allowing Miguel to finally pursue his dream and honor his family. Chuck Palahniuk's novel Fight Club inspired one of the best-loved cult classics of the last 25 years, with a 1999 movie version starring Edward Norton as a narrator disillusioned with the mundanity of his life. The more flamboyant Tyler Durden appears to echo his own long-held criticisms against his capitalist lifestyle, giving a mouthpiece to his anger. Together, they start Fight Club, which is exactly what it sounds like. Amassing a cult-like following of men desperately seeking something to lash out at, it's a pretty short road to extreme criminal behavior and increasingly bizarre acts of vandalism. As our narrator realizes that he's completely losing control to Tyler's chaotic vision for their Project Mayhem, Durden's girlfriend Marla drops the bomb by calling him Tyler. That's right, the narrator was actually Tyler Durden all along. Though he makes harried attempts at preventing Durden's plan of erasing debt by bombing buildings, even he is unable to stop Project Mayhem. On the plus side, he seems to expel the Durden presence from his mind, although the film wraps on a fairly ambiguous note in that regard. Either way, he realizes what a jerk he's been to Marla, and together they watch the buildings fall to the tune of the Pixies' Where Is My Mind? Taking place in what was then the far-flung futuristic year of 2022, Soylent Green has a twist so well known that even if you haven't seen the film, chances are that you know its most famous line. At first, we're only told that Soylent is a cheap, nutritious food staple that comes in several flavorful varieties, such as Soylent Red, Soylent Yellow, and the new Soylent Green. The narrative predicts a world on the verge of climate collapse that we assure you in no way resembles the actual Earth of 2022. Detective Robert Thorne is investigating the murder of a Soylent board member who appears to have been assassinated. Spoiler alert, it really does not work out great for him. Thorne's elderly friend Sol Roth discovers that Soylent Green, once made of plankton, is no longer possible to manufacture due to the effect of pollution and global warming on the ocean. Naturally, the Soylent board opts for the next best thing to plankton: human corpses. Roth dies by assisted suicide, using his last words to tell Thorne the truth. This leads to the famous final scene.
Soylent Green is people!
It's easy to take for granted what a huge deal Saw was for horror fans when it was first released. This is due in no small part to the twist ending, but the setup is where all the magic happens. It opens on a photographer named Adam and a doctor named Gordon, each chained to pipes in a room with a dead body lying face down between them. Each has a micro cassette in their pockets, with Adam's urging him to survive while Gordon's orders him to kill Adam by 6 o'clock. This leads Gordon to realize that they are in the hands of the so-called Jigsaw Killer, known for kidnapping victims and forcing them to participate in elaborate games. It turns out that Gordon is a major suspect in the Jigsaw case, having attracted the attention of Detective Tapp, who sent Adam to spy on him. This leads to a series of reveals that has the audience believing that just about every character in the film could possibly be the real Jigsaw at one point or another. Ultimately, a desperate Gordon frees himself, but only by sawing off his own foot. This in turn comes with the realization that they got everything about Jigsaw's true identity wrong. Adam looks on in horror as the corpse on the floor rises to its feet, revealing himself to be Gordon's patient, John Kramer, the real Jigsaw.
Game over.
This sleek neo-noir takes a dive back into 1950s America, introducing us to Detective Teddy Daniels and his new partner, Chuck. Together, they are investigating a psychiatric institute located on, you guessed it, Shutter Island. An inmate, Rachel Solando, who has drowned her 3 children, has gone missing, and the hospital staff is unhelpful. Daniels becomes convinced that everyone on the grounds is part of a plot to misdirect the investigation, including Chuck. This is all made worse by his constant migraines and blackouts, possibly caused by his memories of serving in the military and witnessing the atrocities at Dachau. When Rachel Solando reappears, she asserts that she's actually a psychiatrist working to develop mind control. Meanwhile, senior psychiatrist Cawley tells Daniels that he never arrived with a partner at all. Eventually, the man we knew as Chuck introduces himself as another doctor at the facility, Dr. Sheehan, informing us that Daniels is actually Andrew, a patient under their care. After Andrew failed to seek treatment for his manic-depressive wife, Dolores, she killed their children, and he killed her. This left him with overwhelming guilt, and his delusions have as such made him a prime candidate for lobotomization. Yet even as Sheehan gives the order, he is left to wonder how powerful Andrew's delusions truly are, as he calls him by the name Teddy, and Andrew does not respond.
What are you thinking? How are you feeling? What have we done to each other?
If ever there was a film that is more a cascading series of twists and a linear narrative story, that would be Gone Girl, but it starts with a basic murder mystery. When his wife Amy goes missing, Nick's general disinterest in the subject raises red flags for pretty much everyone. He and Amy had an unhappy union after relocating from New York to small-town Missouri, which in turn saw him beginning an affair with a student named Andy. Things just get messier from there, with a scavenger hunt leading authorities to discover a partially burned diary in which Amy discloses her apparent fear of Nick. We soon find out, however, that Amy has been alive all this time and is simply hiding out in the Ozarks, getting her kicks by messing with everyone from afar. Considering that we were pretty ready to say goodbye to Nick for killing his wife, this is a stunning moment, but with Amy, the twists never end. Hapless exes are caught in her crossfire, as is an increasingly lost Nick. Though he and his allies get to the bottom of Amy's revenge plot eventually, they are never able to prove anything and are all well aware of her status as a master manipulator. In the end, Nick is powerless to escape her. Even as her crimes escalate, he ultimately agrees to stay with her, and the two of them face the press together, exactly as Amy wants. Barbarian writer and director Zach Krieger apparently loves twists so much that he decided to make a whole movie of them. The story begins with the nightmare scenario of hero Tess showing up to an Airbnb only to discover that a stranger named Keith is already staying there. This makes it seem like we're in for a fairly straightforward horror movie, yet the danger that Keith might pose goes on the back burner as Tess discovers a literal torture dungeon downstairs. When Keith is brutally killed by a naked, screaming woman covered in grime, it's clear that Barbarian is not going to follow the story we expect it to. The story flips over to the homeowner, an actor named AJ, whose career is derailed when his co-star comes forward with sexual assault allegations. Though he denies this, it's clear that he did something very wrong. Returning to his property in hopes of rebuilding, he comically fails to see the danger he's in and ends up trapped in the basement with Tess. Taking a trip back in time, we see that the standard stoic conservative man who previously owned the house still lives in the tunnels below. He spent decades dragging women into the basement to torture them, with a naked woman being his offspring. There are actually still more twists to this film, but we're running out of breath, so we'll just say that Barbarian is a great reason to skip the apps and book a hotel room. Samuel Bell is hanging out on the moon alone, operating a mining facility with the assistance of a very anthropomorphized AI named Gertie. Almost right off the bat, Sam experiences delusions and nearly dies when he crashes his lunar rover. However, he has no memories of this and begins to suspect that Gertie is deceiving him. This is correct, and he discovers a doppelganger of himself at the site of the crash. Dragging his other self back to the base, he confronts Gertie, who explains that they are actually both clones. Though they are there to keep the station functional, their occasional deaths are expected by the company, which has granted Gertie the freedom to awaken new clones at will. This is a pretty huge twist in and of itself, but the film is not done with us yet. The company the Sams work for has intentionally jammed signals to prevent him from ever successfully calling for help, meaning he is trapped there indefinitely. The two Sams work together to create an escape plan, with the older version agreeing to stay behind as the younger escapes back to Earth. Though he's able to expose the company that doomed him, this ends on a fairly bittersweet note for Sam, whose wife died on Earth several years before and whose other selves begin to die around their third year of life. Director Henri-Georges Clouzot has often been referred to as the French Hitchcock, which should tell you what to expect from his most famous films. A pioneer in the realm of the thriller, Clouzot's masterwork may very well be La Diabolique. Christina, a Venezuelan immigrant, is the owner of a troubled boarding school that's run by her tyrannical husband, Michel de la Salle. Christina suffers from a heart condition that leaves her physically somewhat frail, making it difficult for her to manage either with or without her husband. Enter Nicole, a teacher with whom Michel is having an affair, who bonds with Christina due to their mutual abuse at his hands. Together, they decide that the only way to rid themselves of Michel is to kill killing. However, when his body goes missing, Christina begins to suspect that Michel is still alive, haunting the grounds and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This ends in a startling conclusion as we realize that Christina's ally Nicole never truly intended to kill Michel. Indeed, they wanted to shock Christina into a fatal heart attack, which is just what happens when Michel comes lumbering toward her one night. This doesn't work out for Nicole and Michel either, but it's impossible not to feel Christina's horror in her last moments. The finale tells us that it's possible that Christina has survived, or is at least haunting the school grounds herself. Writer-director Frank Darabont waited many years for the chance to adapt Stephen King's The Mist, a novella about a town in Maine in which the residents are suddenly surrounded by an all-encompassing fog. While this is ostensibly a simple creature feature, complete with tentacled monsters lurking in the mist that pick off residents at random, the behavior of everyday people in a crisis may be the true horror. David and his son Billy are forced to take shelter with other townspeople in a supermarket as they attempt to cope with the apparent apocalypse, although not everyone wants to work together to survive. Darabont organizes an excellent ensemble cast to deliver a message decidedly more upsetting than even the original Stephen King ending. In fact, that ending is exactly where the movie's major twist comes in. When David and some of the other residents choose to take their own lives rather than face the horror of the monsters lurking outside, he kills the others, including his child, and prepares to walk into the mist to meet his fate. But almost immediately, the mist dissipates as the military arrives and takes care of the threat with little problem. Realizing that he's killed his friends and loved ones for absolutely no reason, David screams in despair, perhaps joined by some members of the audience. M. Night Shyamalan is well known for his twists, from The Sixth Sense to The Village and beyond. One of his most precisely delivered shocks is in the film Unbreakable, which introduces us to a take on superheroes entrenched in day-to-day realism. Point-of-view character David is traumatized, reeling due to being left as the sole survivor of a horrific train derailment that killed 131 other passengers. Soon he meets Elijah Price, known for his physical frailty, who posits that David has superpowers and is, as such, the hero of the story. Rather than donning a cape and tights, David insists that he is no hero. More true to life, his attempts at crime fighting are messy and questionable, leaving him in the midst of an existential crisis as he tries to cope with his new reality. When he uses his powers of intuition on Price, he is stunned to find that the other man has actually orchestrated a number of apparently accidental tragedies, including the train wreck that uncovered David's powers. Using his own theories of superheroes through much of the film to inspire David, we are stunned to realize that Price is actually a supervillain. Taking on the moniker Mr. Glass, he views David as his natural opposite, as seen through the lens of comic book morality. Shades of classic ghost stories like The Turn of the Screw can be found in writer-director Alejandro Amenabar's eerie 2001 chiller The Others. Nicole Kidman stars as Grace Stewart, who lives in a vast mansion with her two young children in the aftermath of World War II. Because the kids are painfully sensitive to light, Grace keeps the house in darkness throughout the day. That makes it the perfect stomping ground for what appears to be the spirits of a family who lived in the house previously, although it appears that the servants who dutifully tend to Grace and the children may actually be dead as well.
I see dead people.
The twist, coming just 2 years after The Sixth Sense, is that it's Grace and her children who are deceased. A despairing Grace smothered the children and took her own life when she learned that her husband was killed in the war. The others they're seeing are actually the living family that has bought the house following the tragedy. But even though the ghostly housekeeper, Mrs. Mills, warns Grace that she'll have to learn to get along with the next occupants of the house, Grace doesn't seem quite ready to make nice as The Others comes to its haunting close. In the landmark 1968 sci-fi film Planet of the Apes, Charlton Heston stars as Taylor, an astronaut who joins a deep space mission not to just explore the galaxy, but to get away from the fellow humans he's come to despise. A time warp sends Taylor and his crew barreling 2,000 years into the future, and they crash land on a planet where evolution is flipped. Intelligent talking apes are the dominant species, and humans are mute savages. Forced to defend his species and aided by sympathetic chimpanzees who discover evidence of human civilization that existed before that of the apes, Taylor escapes death at the hands of the sinister Dr. Zaius, only to have his worst fears confirmed. He's been on Earth all along, with the apes descending after humankind wiped itself out in a nuclear war. The image of Heston falling to his knees in front of a half-buried Statue of Liberty is one of the most powerful in cinematic history, and is easily one of its greatest twist endings.
God damn you all to hell!
A well-crafted plot twist can take a movie from good to great. In fact, some movies are regarded as classics specifically because of twists that completely recontextualize the story. But sending the narrative in an unexpected direction sometimes just ends up making a film worse. As great as it feels to be surprised by an excellent plot twist, these movies would have been better off without them. As always, beware the spoilers ahead. Remember me. There's nothing wrong with a simple romance movie, and as far as that element goes, Remember Me isn't too bad. Its leads, Robert Pattinson and Emily DeRavin, are solid enough in their roles and boast some nice chemistry. And while it may veer into cliché, the film still certainly has its charms. But all of that goes completely and inexplicably down the drain in the movie's final moments. The film has become infamous for its final act, which reveals that the entire story has been leading up to Robert Pattinson's character being in the World Trade Center on September 11th. It's a subject matter that Remember Me bungles badly, taking a horrific tragedy and using it as cheap emotional manipulation.
I mean, why aren't you riveted?
Aside from being deeply insensitive, it's also a case of blown potential, as the romantic drama is just fine without resorting to the careless and contrived finale. The Village. The biggest problem with The Village is that its twist turns into a much worse movie. Writer-director M. Night Shyamalan's last act plot twists helped launch his career, but they ended up becoming notorious to the point of parody after this one. The horror film appears to center on a small 19th century village, which has been surrounded by mysterious monsters. But it's actually revealed that the creatures don't exist. They're just the town elders in costume, trying to scare people into staying put in their safe community. That's all well and good enough until the second twist arrives to reveal the film actually takes place in the modern day. And the village elders created these monsters to keep their people protected from the woes of the outside world. With just the first twist in place, the movie might work as a solid social commentary, but the second rug pull makes the movie needlessly convoluted. Spectre. Given the film's title, it's not surprising that Spectre centers on the villainous organization headed up by Ernst Blofeld, one of 007's greatest villains, or that Christoph Waltz was brought in to portray the criminal mastermind, despite some slack attempts at secrecy.
So thank you, cuckoo.
But instead of simply rebooting the iconic villain, Waltz's character is also eventually revealed to be Bond's adopted brother, making a surprise return after faking his own death. The twist is completely superfluous. The original Blofeld is a force of pure evil, and he doesn't need to be tied to Bond in any way to be effective. The revelation that Bond has a secret brother who ended up orchestrating the events in the previous Daniel Craig-led Bond films strains all credibility for his run in the franchise.
It was me, James, the author of all your pain.
Put simply, it's a twist that twists too hard. Savages. Oliver Stone's film adaptation of Savages initially seems to end like the book, with the demise of basically every character providing a sort of closure. It also fits in well with the way the storytellers want viewers to see the three main characters. They're too wild for this world, and it only makes sense for them to go out in a blaze of glory. Unfortunately, Stone tacks on a twist wherein the ending is revealed to be an elaborate fantasy playing out in the head of one character. Instead, the bad guys get arrested and the good guys get out clean, riding off into the sunset. This disjointed happy ending isn't just a cheat, it feels like a painfully safe move. High tension. When crafting a good plot twist, it's incredibly important to consider whether it upends the plausibility of the story. Unfortunately for Alexandra Aja's High Tension, its Hail Mary of a twist ending, in which the killer is revealed to be a dissociative identity of the protagonist, sends plausibility down the drain. The film, up until that point, is a pretty straightforward slasher that stands out for its artful gore. So, why the needless twist? Shots filmed from the villain's point of view make little sense after the twist, and the film's opening is even more confusing when it's watched while knowing who the killer turns out to be. Secret Window. Speaking of misuse of dissociative identity disorder, Secret Window also stumbles in its presentation of the illness. It should be a slam dunk of a movie. Based on a Stephen King short story, it's about a writer who retreats to a cabin in the woods to craft his next book, only to be confronted by a deranged stranger named Shooter, who claims he has plagiarized one of his works.
You stole my story.
Tensions between the two escalate and eventually turn to violence. The twist is that Shooter doesn't exist, and is instead a result of our lead's mental unwellness, which, conveniently, has never manifested in the movie until this moment. Sometimes this twist works, like with Fight Club and Primal Fear, but in Secret Window, it comes off as uninspired, which is ironic considering how much we hear about stories needing to stick the landing throughout.
The only thing that matters is the ending.
Scream 3. The first film in the Scream franchise features a twist that is revelatory for the horror genre. There are two culprits behind the film's slaughter spree, not just one.
Surprise, Sydney.
The twist is so good that it's repeated in the sequel, Scream 2, and mostly still works. For the third film, though, the filmmakers go with a new twist, and it ends up being just plain dumb. Part of the reason the first two films in the franchise enjoy such reverence is that they function as critiques of the genre. They're self-aware and skewer the typical tropes that had started to bore audiences. The problem with Scream 3's needlessly complicated reveal is that it resembles something from the films the franchise itself satirizes. The revelation that the baddie in this film is Scream protagonist Sidney's secret half-brother, and that he has effectively orchestrated the events of the entire series, is completely unbelievable. It's a jump-the-shark moment in a franchise that scoffs at cliché and closes out the original series with a whimper instead of, well, a scream. But hey, credit to Stu for trying to tie everything together and save the story. Again.
If you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, then the sequel rules do not apply.
It's been a big year for twist endings. So far, we've seen heroes turn into villains, villains turn into allies, secret societies at work, life-altering decisions, and even one movie that turned out to partially take place in a video game. These are the biggest plot twists of 2019 so far. Spoilers ahead. The marketing of Us presented the film as a home invasion thriller with a dark secret. That secret seems to get revealed when Red explains the nature of the Tethered and why she decided to stage an uprising for her people. It's a twist of sorts, but it's really more of an explanation.
The two were connected, tethered together.
Then the real twist arrives at the very end of the movie when Adelaide realizes via a long repressed memory that she's actually the tethered one, and that Red was her original self who she strangled and hid down in the tunnels so she could attempt to live a normal life. In retrospect, it explains so much, but even if some viewers guessed it from the beginning, watching it all build to that moment remains intensely satisfying. There are a number of exciting developments in the much-anticipated and divisive final season of Game of Thrones, which could be considered important twists. If we're talking about truly massive twists, though, we have to talk about the Mad Queen and the fall of Daenerys Targaryen. Though it had been foreshadowed in various ways throughout the series, Dany's turn from righteous crusader for the oppressed to full-on genocidal dragon rider happened so quickly in the midst of the show's final season that many fans were caught off guard. The episode in which she reached a point of no return, The Bells, is one of the most harrowing moments in the entire series, and some viewers still have their jaws on the floor. In 2016, M. Night Shyamalan pulled off what might be the biggest twist of his career with the surprise reveal that his thriller Split was actually a secret sequel to his 2000 classic Unbreakable. Glass is a follow-up to both films that brings together the heroes and villains of each story into one superhero universe. But it gets even wilder from there. It turns out that Kevin Wendell Crumb, aka the Horde, and David Dunn, aka the Overseer, are not the most powerful forces in their world. As their final clash is underway, Shyamalan reveals that they were brought together not to be studied or have their superpowers revealed, but to be executed by a secret society determined to keep the balance by wiping out gifted people. Then, of course, Shyamalan couldn't help but throw in another twist by making the brilliant Mr. Glass construct a counter-scheme that resulted in proof of superheroes being released to the world, establishing the potential for an even bigger universe, and presumably even more twists to come. Avengers Endgame was only ever going to end one way, with the Avengers finding a path to defeating Thanos and restoring their snapped-out friends to life after the events of Infinity War. We knew that going in. The only mystery was in how it would happen, and the film threw viewers for a loop just a few minutes into the adventure. The stage is set for an Avengers vs. Thanos rematch almost right away, but when the surviving members of Earth's mightiest heroes get to him, Thanos reveals that he's already destroyed the Infinity Stones.
He used the stones to destroy the stones. It nearly killed me, but the work is done.
Thor executes Thanos, and before we can even get over the shock of that death, the film jumps ahead 5 years to show a seemingly doomed world. The 2019 film adaptation of Stephen King's Pet Sematary didn't attempt to hide its major alterations to the source material. Some of the film's earliest trailers gave away that the new movie was going to make the Creed family's eldest child, Ellie, the victim of a tragic early death and even more tragic resurrection. That runs contrary to King's book, which kills off the family's youngest child, Gage. It was a big change that seemed to allow the filmmakers more leeway to play with the psychological terror while also upping the violence factor of the undead child. It was also a brilliant bait and switch, hiding the film's real twist. The original story ends with Louis Creed's killer undead son murdering his wife, which then drives Louis to bury her in the cemetery to bring her back as an undead ghoul as well. In the new film, the undead Ellie kills both her mother and father and buries them in the cemetery. And then the trio of undead Creeds descend on a young Gage as the movie ends. It ups the horror quotient of the film's final minutes quite a bit, and while not all fans will agree with the new direction, there's little doubt that few of us saw it coming. Serenity came and went as a blip on the screen in the midst of a crowded year for movies, despite a cast that includes Oscar winners Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway. Serenity is the story of a fisherman and boat captain who's obsessed with catching a big tuna that always seems to avoid him. His relatively boring life is changed when his ex-wife shows up and offers him a ton of money to kill her abusive new husband. So far, all the ingredients for a nice little thriller are there, and then it turns out that this is all happening inside a video game. That's right, the story of Serenity is actually that a 13-year-old boy has programmed a video game as a therapeutic exercise to reconnect with his dead father. Then he decides to change the game's programming when he realizes he wants to kill his abusive stepfather. Then things get even weirder when the game itself seems to want to deny its own programming and somehow prevent the murder. You'd think the biggest twist in Spider-Man Far From Home would come from Mysterio, the man who uses super advanced illusion tech to trick everyone into thinking he's a superhero fighting off city-destroying monsters. The trouble is, a lot of people guessed the twist that Mysterio was a villain just from watching the film's trailers and understanding that Mysterio is traditionally a villain in the comics. To be truly surprised by a daring twist, you have to stick around until the mid-credits scene. There, it's revealed that Mysterio doctored a video before his death to make Spider-Man look like the true villain of their struggle, while also outing Peter Parker as the man in the mask. This sudden change in the character's status quo, plus the sudden return of J.K. Simmons' J. Jonah Jameson to the Spider-Man universe, is enough to make the audience feel as shocked as Peter Parker. Set in 1969 Hollywood, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood shows us a history of a tipping point within both the film industry and Los Angeles as a whole. There's a sense of a city and an art form on the brink, and Quentin Tarantino successfully creates the feeling that anything might happen. Then, as the film reaches its climax, he drops the big twist. It turns out that anything can happen feeling is there to set up Tarantino's dream version of events. A world in which Sharon Tate and her friends are never murdered by the Manson family, and the family members are instead fought off by Cliff Booth and Rick Dalton. Sharon survives, Rick gets another shot at a career, and Cliff is along for the ride. It's a bittersweet happily ever after, and one that lands even if you do see it coming. There are two major twists in Joker, and both are presented in a way that creates a certain sense of ambiguity so that you're not sure what to believe. The first arrives when it's revealed that Arthur Fleck might actually be the illegitimate son of Thomas Wayne himself, which makes him Bruce Wayne's half-brother. Doubt is later cast on this claim, but Arthur seems to cling to it, and that attachment pays off later. The film's ending drops the second major twist. The riot Arthur Fleck inspired creates the environment in which Bruce Wayne's parents were killed. So, in the continuity of this movie, the Joker inadvertently creates Batman. Does this make the film too twisty for its own good? Your mileage may vary, but there's no doubt you left the theater thinking about it. Shazam seemed to be a pretty traditional superhero origin story as it follows Billy Batson and his journey from orphan boy to impossibly powerful superhero. We see Billy learning to use his new powers in a mature way, his connection to the people who become his chosen family, and his eventual defeat of the supervillain Savannah not just through brawn but through the power of love. The twist comes in just how that love manifests itself. In the midst of his final battle with Savannah, Billy remembers the wizard who gave him his powers hinted that he would be able to share that power.
With your heart, unlock your greatest power. Thrones of our brothers and sisters await.
Billy realizes that means that he must pass his gifts on to his chosen family. And that's how, in 2019, we got the Shazam family on the big screen. The film's willingness to put such a massive new development out there so late in the story was part of what made it so much fun. One of the biggest keys to Parasite's success is the way it lulls you into thinking everything's going to go one way before zipping off in another unexpected direction. The major turn comes midway through the film, just after the Kim family has thoroughly infiltrated the Park family's lives. At this point, director Bong Joon-ho has expertly planted the seeds for what we think is about to happen, which is the Park family's slow discovery that the Kim family have conned them. Then the doorbell rings and the fired housekeeper who we never expected to see again shows up. Then she enters the Park house again and reveals both the secret bunker beneath the structure and the man living down there. It's a brilliant turn that subverts expectations and fits perfectly within the film's framework. Knives Out provides ample opportunities for twists and turns during its runtime, and writer-director Rian Johnson delivers plenty. However, the biggest plot twist at work in Knives Out involves Harlan Thrombey, a noted mystery writer who's found dead of an apparent suicide at the beginning of the film. It's eventually revealed that Harlan did commit suicide after his nurse Marta accidentally gave him what she believed to be a fatal dose of morphine. Harlan killed himself rather than risk Marta getting arrested for a simple mistake, but it turns out there was even more to the story. In the end, private investigator Benoit Blanc reveals that Harlan's grandson Ransom actually switched the labels on Harlan's medication to engineer the morphine overdose, but Marta gave Harlan the right medication out of instinct. So the twist in the end is that there's not a murder of any kind, and that Harlan's death really was just a misguided suicide. If you walk out of the lighthouse and someone asks you what the film's about, there's a good chance you'll have some difficulty answering that question. Yes, it's the story of two lighthouse keepers who seem to be slowly losing their grip on sanity and reality, but if you really dig into the intricacies of the film, it's a lot more complicated than that. That said, there's still a powerful twist lying in wait near the end of the film. It comes when the young Wickie Ephraim Winslow reveals that his real name is Thomas Howard, and that Winslow was an identity he stole from a man who died in a timber accident that he didn't stop. This revelation and the guilt that comes with it helps to add tremendous depth and emotional weight to the film's powerful climax. Plus, there's the fact that the twist means that both major characters are named Thomas, their similarities contrasting against each other in progressively more violent ways. When in doubt, hit them with the twist. That seems to have been the thought process of Avengers Endgame screenwriters Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, who recently sat down with the New York Times to discuss the film's plot in the wake of its runaway success. The twist in question occurs early in the film when the remaining Avengers track down Thanos, now living on the lonely planet he retreated to after snuffing out half of all life in the universe. Their goal? To swipe the Infinity Stones and use them to undo the Mad Titan's damage. But upon arriving, they find that Thanos has used the power of the stones to reduce them to atoms, rendering their mission moot. In a moment of pure frustration, Thor does what he should have done during the Battle of Wakanda and went for the head, killing the most formidable foe the Avengers had ever faced roughly 20 minutes into the movie. It was a shocking narrative decision, one which Marcus and McFeely admitted they struggled to pin down. McFeely told the New York Times, "We always had this problem. Thanos has the ultimate weapon. He can see an attack coming. It's ridiculous." At some point, executive producer Trin Tran went, "Can't we just kill him?" And we all went, "What happens if you just kill him? Why would you kill him? Why would he let you kill him?" The answer to that question is simple. Thanos had accomplished what he set out to do. Marcus explained, "It reinforced Thanos' agenda. He was done. Not to make him too Christ-like, but it was like, if I've got to die, I can die now."
And then what?
I finally rest and watch the sunrise on a grateful universe.
Thor's brutal beheading of the Mad Titan benefited no one, however. It was an act of pure frustration, and one which was never going to bring back the Infinity Stones or any of the Avengers' fallen comrades. In fact, it seems likely that the noble Asgardian's desperate, vengeful killing of Thanos may have been the final straw in causing him to spiral into a years-long bout with depression. But this also gave Thor, who has gone from a rather one-note hero to arguably the most fascinating and complex character in the MCU, one of Endgame's most emotionally satisfying arcs. It wasn't until his encounter with his mother Frigga in 2013, during the Avengers' time heist to recover the Infinity Stones, that he came to terms with his failure. It all fell into place neatly for Marcus and McFeely, who had gone into the screenwriting process with little idea of where they could take the Asgardians' personal journey during Endgame. Marcus said, "When we were spitballing for Endgame, we started with Thor's on a mission of vengeance, and then we were like, he was on a mission of vengeance in the last movie. This is all this guy ever does. Let's drive him into a wall and see what happens." In the end, by compounding his failure to stop Thanos in a moment of weakness, the near-immortal god was made more relatable to the audience than he ever had been before. Will Marvel continue exploring the journey of Odinson in Phase 4 and beyond? Of all the original Avengers, it makes the most sense for the God of Thunder's story to continue, and Chris Hemsworth has proven himself more than capable of taking the character to more interesting places than anyone ever expected. But will he play a key role in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, going into action to face some new cosmic threat? Will he return for another crossover team-up film at some point in the MCU's future? Or will he become the first Avenger to get a fourth solo flick? Only time will tell.
A well-executed plot twist can turn a middling movie into a good movie and a solid movie into a great movie. But there are just as many films that focus on plot twists to the detriment of everything else, especially when they start adding way too many twists for one movie. Major spoiler alert for the following films. The ending of The Sixth Sense was strong enough to make the Shyamalan twist a recognizable and anticipated moment in the writer-director's films. Unfortunately, after Unbreakable, he started slipping when it came to the twist department. Perhaps that was the reason the filmmaker went a bit overboard in 2004's The Village. The film follows a group of people living a modest life in a rural village that is occasionally beset by monsters. As it turns out, the creatures are just village elders, enacting a ritual to encourage their younger residents to stay in the village. But when the blind daughter of the chief elder ventures out of the village to look for medicine, she's attacked by a real monster. One that actually turns out to be a mentally disabled fellow villager wearing one of the monster outfits. The real twist is that once she escapes the village, it turns out that what had appeared to be a 19th century community was actually just a giant live-action roleplay. The film takes place in the modern day, and the village elders have bought and maintained an isolated piece of land in a wildlife preserve to start a new and pure society. We don't blame Shyamalan for trying to one-up himself in terms of twists, but he might have gone a little bit too far on this one. Daniel Craig has made his mark on the James Bond character with his run on the franchise. The eagerly awaited Spectre was meant to bring everything together, introducing fans to a new version of fan-favorite Bond villain, Blofeld, and showcasing his ultra-powerful and secretive organization, the titular Spectre. Unfortunately, the pressure might have been too much for the filmmakers. Spectre is a completely bonkers film that links together all of the previous villains in the Craig films into being part of the titular evil organization. As if that weren't enough, it turns out that Blofeld is actually Bond's foster brother from childhood, who built his entire evil organization for the purpose of destroying Bond, who he sees as a rival for his father's attention. Rather than expanding the world of the franchise, the plot twist shrinks it all down. Instead of going on adventures and proving himself as a super spy against all manner of charismatic supervillains, it turns out that the through line of Craig's Bond films was just a family squabble. With half a dozen Mission Impossible films showcasing new and inventive ways for Tom Cruise to nearly kill himself for our amusement, it might be hard to remember how convoluted and confusing the first Mission Impossible is. While later films in the franchise would draw upon misdirection and trickery, the actual plot itself usually isn't hard to follow. That's not the case with the first film.
Abort! Do you read me?
In 1996's Mission Impossible, a routine IMF operation goes wrong when Ethan is accused of being a mole and hunted down by his own organization, a common occurrence in the franchise. In order to clear his name, he has to break into the CIA headquarters to steal a list of CIA cover stories that the real mole was trying to sell to an arms dealer. So in order to find out the real mole, Ethan has to pretend to be the mole, steal the real list to replace a fake list, then make sure the real list doesn't actually make it to the arms dealer, while also trying to stop the real mole from stealing the real list, all while staying alive and out of jail. Simple, right? That's not even mentioning the disavowed IMF agents, triple agent femme fatale, and eerily realistic human face masks. Thankfully, most of the films following stuck to simple plots and insanely complicated stunts, instead of trying to outsmart audiences with a confusing story. Is A Simple Favor a Paul Feig comedy played extremely straight? Or a murder mystery drama with over-the-top characters and plot twists? Maybe it's both. Either way, it's a movie with a ludicrous number of insane plot twists that read like half a dozen Agatha Christie novels were stitched together. Anna Kendrick plays Stephanie, a mummy vlogger who falls into an increasingly intimate friendship with Blake Lively's Emily. When Emily's body turns up a little while later, Stephanie suspects that Emily's husband, Sean, killed his wife in order to collect on her life insurance. That's when things go totally off the rails. Emily's body wasn't really Emily at all. Instead, it was the body of Emily's twin sister, Faith. Emily's real name is Hope, and she plans to pin the death of her twin on Sean as revenge for him sleeping with Stephanie. It's all very soap opera. Ultimately, the day is saved when a fake plan to extract a confession from Emily with a fake gun is interrupted by Emily trying to kill Sean and Stephanie with a real gun, which is then interrupted by a SWAT team that was watching the events happen on Stephanie's mummy vlog livestream. Simple.
I can't keep track of any of it anymore!
Twists and turns are part and parcel of the mystery genre, but A Simple Favor just feels convoluted by the time the credits roll. When a movie is packed to the brim with beloved actors, it could end up like a Coen Brothers film. Or you could get Collateral Beauty. Sure, it stars an absurd number of gifted actors like Keira Knightley, Helen Mirren, Kate Winslet, Edward Norton, and Will Smith, but despite the on-screen talent, this movie is out of its mind. So what's this star-studded film all about? Well, the story follows Howard, an advertising executive who lost his daughter to a tragic accident years earlier. Ever since, he's been writing letters to the abstract concepts of love, time, and death. Meanwhile, his crooked business partners and estranged friends discover this habit and hire actors to portray the three abstract concepts. Why? They want to film Howard talking to them, erase the actors digitally, and then submit the recording to prove that Howard is unfit to lead the company that they all work at. Meanwhile, Howard befriends a divorcee whose own daughter died suddenly. By the end of the film, she turns out to have been Howard's actual wife, and the two have been treating each other as strangers the whole time for some bizarre reason. In the end, Howard does actually leave the company when his estranged friend's plan is implemented perfectly, but he forgives them because they were doing it to help him. Oh, and the actors playing love, time, and death actually are the personifications of love, time, and death, who decided to help Howard and his friends learn to love again. Talk about a head trip. Even if you enjoy predicting plot twists before they happen, chances are good you won't be able to guess the old secret Nazi diamond one until after watching Inside Man.
Pay strict attention to what I say because I choose my words carefully and I never repeat myself.
The film focuses on a bank heist and the hostage negotiator trying to keep the crooks from killing any of the regular people trapped inside the bank with them. And as it turns out, the entire robbery is fake, or at the very least, the bad guys' weapons are. And after the cops mix up who's a hostage and who's a robber, it doesn't seem like anything was actually stolen. But then there's the twist. The bank robbers built an entire fake wall in the vault for the ringleader to wait inside until the cops leave, so he can steal some Nazi diamonds that have been sitting inside the bank since World War II. While whodunits can be a lot of fun, Inside Man is more of a why-done-it or a how-done-it. How did no one notice the fake wall? Why did the thieving mastermind do all this to enlighten one enterprising hostage negotiator about Nazi shenanigans? Who's checking to make sure any of this makes sense? Nicolas Cage is known to audiences as a wild actor that can be hard to understand. But despite his crazy reputation, his movies are generally pretty well constructed and even-keeled, mostly. That isn't the case with Knowing, a film about how Cage's astrophysicist character is the only one who can stop a global extinction event. After his son discovers a series of numbers buried in a time capsule that correspond to various disasters in history, Cage notices the numbers also predict disasters that haven't happened yet. Worse, one disaster promises to wipe out the entire planet. Nicolas Cage using math to save the planet from global extinction is a fine premise on its own, but that's before Knowing hits its stride. Throughout the film, mysterious strangers have been following Cage's son, and it turns out they're actually aliens gathering up the world's children to take them to another planet for some reason. Cage's character is left alone on the planet to die as every living organism is reduced to ashes by a solar flare. What does it all mean? Math is useless. J.J. Abrams' Star Trek reinvigorated the flagging franchise with an updated aesthetic, a young new cast, and a convenient explanation about how it's a parallel story to the original Star Trek television show instead of simply being a reboot. Following that success, audiences everywhere were eager to see what the sequel would do with the newly fertile story space. As it turns out, Star Trek Into Darkness was basically just a remake of Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, despite many interviews from the filmmakers denying it beforehand, to the point that Abrams publicly regrets the secrecy. Benedict Cumberbatch playing Khan might be too much for many fans, but things get even worse when Captain James T. Kirk sacrifices himself to save his crew in a nearly identical inverted shot from Star Trek II, where the original Spock also takes one for the team. However, while the original Star Trek films at least waited for a sequel to bring back Spock, Kirk is up and blasting the Beastie Boys again by the end of Into Darkness, thanks to a fortuitous blood infusion from Khan's life-saving body juice. In other words, just watch Wrath of Khan instead of this darkness. Twilight Breaking Dawn Part 2 holds the fewest plot twists here, but that's just because the filmmakers only needed one to cross the line into too many territory. The story of the films are simple. Human Bella Swan is enamored with her vampire boyfriend Edward and wants to marry him and become a vampire, in that order. By the time Breaking Dawn rolls around, Bella is newly turned and forced to team up with her vampire in-laws to battle against a secret vampire society that wants to kill her half-vampire baby. That's when things go off the rails. Bella, her vampire family, her werewolf friends, and the evil vampire society start killing each other in increasingly violent ways. It's a frenetic turbine of CGI carnage that ends with most of the fan-favorite characters dead. It's also a complete fabrication, a psychic vision from one of the superpowered vampires to show what would have gone down had the battle actually happened. For mega fans of the book, it likely left them tense in their seats. For everyone else, the revelation that it was all a dream probably left them scratching their heads. Either way, one plot twist was one too many. If you heard anything about Netflix's original horror movie, The Perfection, chances are good that you were encouraged to go in as ill-informed as possible. That's because the film has so many twists that part of the pleasure of it is feeling unsure of what the actual story is about. And partly because it doesn't really hold together by the end. True, the film starts simply enough. Charlotte, a former cellist prodigy, is forced to hang up her bow to take care of an ailing mother. In turn, her former mentors have found a replacement in Lizzie. That's when things get weird. Lizzie seems to get infected by an earlier foreshadowed flu, which eventually culminates in her vomiting up wriggling maggots and chopping off her own arm to stop the bugs inside her body from devouring her. But actually, the entire sequence was engineered by Charlotte, who drugged Lizzie in order to ruin the younger woman's musical career.
Pharmacy is open for business. What is that? Hair of the dog? It's the best cure.
In yet another twist, it turns out that Charlotte had good intentions. She was trying to help Lizzie escape a life of musical domination and sexual violence at the hands of their shared mentor. It also turns out that Lizzie thinks it's worth the pain in order to truly excel as a musician. But wait, we're not done yet. It then actually turns out that she and Charlotte engineered it all to trap their former teacher, chop off his arms and legs, and play a duet together. When a film is almost too confusing to summarize, you know you've got too many plot twists.
Properly executed, a good twist can elevate a film to the next level, but some movies just don't know when to stop piling it on. From sci-fi flicks to mystery movies, these are the plot twists that went too far. But be warned, major spoilers are ahead. Since Daniel Craig took over as James Bond with 2006's Casino Royale, 007 films have tended towards becoming darker, more personal, and less pulpy in each installment. At least this was the case until 2015's Spectre. The film features a long-awaited return of recurring villain, Ernst Stavro Blofeld, leader of the criminal organization Spectre. Near the end of the movie, Bond discovers that Blofeld is not only behind all of the evil plots that he's faced over the past 3 films, he's also responsible for every major personal misfortune that Bond has ever suffered. This is because, get ready for it, Blofeld is actually James Bond's long-lost and vindictive adoptive brother.
Cuckoo.
We understand why this twist makes sense on paper. Conventional wisdom states that the more powerful the villain, the more interesting the conflict, and also that villains should have a personal relationship with the hero. The logical endpoint of this is to give James Bond an evil brother who single-handedly controls all the crime in the world. Unfortunately, this also means that the once large and indifferent world that Bond fought against has now been reduced to a family squabble. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's not what made the Craig-era Bond film so great. In the 2009 film Splice, cutting-edge geneticists Clive and Elsa are forbidden by their bosses from using human DNA in their experiments, so they decide to ignore the orders and continue their experiments in secret. In doing this, they create Dren, a near-human, multi-species hybrid. Clive and Elsa take it upon themselves to covertly raise Dren as their own daughter, and she starts maturing extremely fast, going through childhood, adolescence, and adulthood over the course of the film. The twist in Splice isn't one moment where everything suddenly goes wrong. It's more like a series of disturbing developments that culminate in a genuinely upsetting fiasco of a climax. For starters, when Dren is a newborn, Clive attempts to drown her, but it turns out that she has amphibious lungs. Elsa eventually reveals that she herself donated her own DNA to make up Dren's human half, not some anonymous donor. Once Dren reaches adulthood, she and Clive begin to have a physical relationship. Then, towards the end of the film, Dren spontaneously changes gender, becoming male, hyper-violent, and territorial. Finally, Dren kills Clive and assaults Elsa, who is forced to bludgeon Dren to death with a rock. And as if that wasn't enough, the film ends with a reveal that Elsa is pregnant with Dren's baby. At times, the script of Splice seems to exist merely to violate every possible taboo that the writer could think of, with no deep meaning or philosophy at its core. It certainly makes for a compelling film, but only because you're waiting to see what else could possibly happen. Released in 2009, Orphan tells the story of Kate and John Coleman, a couple who adopt a child named Esther from a local orphanage. At first, their new daughter seems sweet and innocent, but as time goes on, the Colemans begin to suspect that Esther might have a dark side. In its first two acts, Orphan is a fairly competent execution of the classic evil child horror story, and then it completely goes off the rails in Act 3. Throughout the film, Esther seems to have a surprising amount of knowledge of and interest in adult relationships, despite being ostensibly 9 years old. This culminates with her unsuccessfully attempting to seduce her father, which causes him and Kate to start digging into Esther's past. Kate learns the truth that Esther isn't really a child. She's a 33-year-old woman with a condition called hypoparathyroidism, which stunted her growth. She uses her childlike appearance to take advantage of people, and she's also a homicidal maniac. Many people found the plot of this film deeply offensive for multiple reasons. Some took issue with the way that it depicted hypoparathyroidism, a real-life condition that this movie grossly misrepresents. Adoption groups also denounced the film for similarly obvious reasons. The backlash was so strong that the home video release of the film even felt the need to include a pro-adoption message as a way to counteract the toxic narrative of the movie. Released in 2019, Serenity tells the story of Baker Dill, a boat captain who lives on a remote Plymouth island. He spends his days trying to hunt down and catch an elusive giant fish named Justice. Out of the blue, Dill's ex-wife Karen shows up and presents him with an offer. She tells Dill that her current husband Frank is abusing their son, the quiet and introverted Patrick. Frank is planning on visiting Plymouth Island soon, so Karen offers Dill $10 million in cash if he takes Frank out on a fishing trip and ensures that he never returns. So far, so good, but here comes a twist.
Plymouth Island is a game.
That's right, Plymouth Island and all of its inhabitants don't really exist. This world is actually a realistic video game that was created by and is being played by our true protagonist, Patrick. His real father died a decade earlier. Baker Dill is a fictionalized version of Patrick's dad that he's using to enact a cathartic fantasy of killing his stepfather. And then when Dill finally does decide to knock off Frank within the game, Patrick similarly works up the courage to kill Frank in the real world. While Serenity starts to fall apart after the twist, it's always fun to watch Matthew McConaughey play an offbeat character, even one who has a hard time expressing his emotions. The Force Awakens was a promising start to a new trilogy, ending with an array of tantalizing unanswered questions. Perhaps the most intriguing of all concern the enigmatic Rey. Despite being a poor orphan from a remote planet with no Jedi training, she has inexplicably strong Force powers. Could Rey perhaps be the long-lost child of some great Jedi? The next Star Wars film, The Last Jedi, pulled the rug out from under audiences by answering the question of who Rey's parents were in the most shocking way of all, by saying they were nobodies who sold their daughter into slavery. Then The Rise of Skywalker was released. raised. In this film, Rey learns that she is, in fact, the long-lost granddaughter of Emperor Palpatine, a reveal that most found equal parts confusing and unnecessary. Some fans think that this new twist was added just to appease those who disliked the reveal in The Last Jedi, but it was so poorly executed and nonsensical that it seemed more like a cleanup job than a genuine plot point.
What a dreadful situation.
Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them opens with a montage of news headlines, telling us that the evil wizard Gellert Grindelwald is still at large and could be anywhere. The segment is brief but important info for the upcoming twist. Then the film proper begins. Our hero, Newt Scamander, is a magizoologist who's just arrived in New York in 1926 with a suitcase full of rare magical creatures. Scamander soon runs afoul of Percival Graves, a high-ranking official in the magical government of the United States. Graves asserts that one of Scamander's creatures is responsible for the death of a local politician, but in truth, Graves is attempting to frame Scamander to cover up his own crimes. Once Graves is exposed and defeated, Scamander discovers that Graves has magically disguised his appearance. After dispelling his magic, Scamander reveals that Percival Graves is actually, in a shockingly underwhelming twist, Gellert Grindelwald.
What are the odds of that?
To be fair, Grindelwald is an important figure in larger Harry Potter lore, but up until now within this particular story, he did not matter at all. Sure, we technically got a bit of a tease about Grindelwald at the very beginning, but he was barely mentioned throughout the rest of the film. When he finally appeared, many viewers had totally forgotten about him. While some die-hard Harry Potter fans thought this was a cool reveal, others thought it was a bit confusing, or even worse, laughable. When a dangerous patient named Rachel Solando mysteriously vanishes from a maximum security mental hospital, US Marshal Edward Teddy Daniels arrives on Shutter Island to solve the case. As he digs deeper, Teddy begins to suspect that Andrew Ladis, the man who is responsible for his wife's death, is also somewhere on the island, and he vows to find him as well. After a series of surreal visions and frightening encounters, Teddy makes a horrifying discovery. In truth, he is Andrew Ladis, a patient at this facility. He killed his own wife, and this entire investigation was an elaborate roleplay therapy staged by his doctors to give him a chance to confront his demons. The big kicker? Edward Daniels is an anagram for Andrew Ladis, and Rachel Solando is an anagram for his wife's name, Dolores Channel. When Shutter Island hit theaters, it received a lukewarm response from critics and audiences. The plot device of a man investigating a homicide only to discover that he is the killer has been done much better in other movies. Shutter Island is still a decent film, so it's hard to get too worked up over this one. But did we really need another movie where it was all in his head?
Excuse me.
In the 2018 film Upgrade, Gray Trace and his wife are attacked by mysterious assailants. Gray ends up paralyzed and his wife is killed. Shortly after, tech mogul Aaron Keane offers Gray a chance to walk again by installing a prototype AI chip named STEM into his spine. He accepts, and after the procedure, Gray finds out that not only can he walk again, he can also temporarily gain superhuman reflexes by giving control of his body to STEM. Gray then uses these abilities to get revenge on the people who attacked him through a series of thrilling and brutal action sequences. In the end, Gray discovers that his friend Keane hired the goons that attacked him, but it wasn't Keane's idea, it was STEM's. After Keane invented STEM, the AI forced him to participate in a plan to give itself a human body, which ended up being Gray's. So how does our hero win the day? Well, unfortunately, he doesn't. There's a moment where we think he's won. Gray appears in a hospital bed, alongside his still-living wife, but this is, in fact, just a fantasy world that Gray is trapped in. STEM has now taken full control of Gray's body permanently. Between the rich benefactor is evil, the AI is evil, and the happy ending is actually a dream, Upgrade has 3 fairly tired sci-fi cliches woven into its plot. Taken together, they end this almost great movie on a gratuitously bleak note.
I'm not proud of that.
With a little more restraint, Now You See Me could have easily been a fun and glamorous crime romp a la Ocean's 11 or Catch Me If You Can. The film was a globe-trotting cat-and-mouse chase between FBI investigator Dylan Rhodes and a group of Robin Hood-esque criminal magicians called the Four Horsemen. That premise alone could be more than enough for a cool heist film, but this movie just doesn't know when to quit. Layered on top of that, Rhodes discovers that the Horsemen have ties to an ancient order of wizards called the Eye, with real magical powers. But that's not all. The final twist is that, although Rose has been attempting to catch the Horsemen, he's secretly their leader and a member of the Eye. Presumably, Rose's entire multi-decade FBI career was a long con so that he could serve as the group's inside man for a single heist. This idea is so inconceivably elaborate that it completely shatters the reality of the film, even more than the actual magic does. Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness pits Stephen Strange against some unexpected villains, and the biggest one might be someone we all thought we knew. Warning, spoilers ahead for Doctor Strange 2.
The fate of the multiverse depends on us.
Prior to its release, there was a good deal of speculation as to what kind of role the Scarlet Witch would play in Doctor Strange 2. Wanda Maximoff has already gone through quite the journey in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, entering Avengers Age of Ultron as an antagonist until she joins up with the good guys for the final fight. She remains a force for good throughout the rest of her cinematic appearances until she seemingly breaks bad with WandaVision. She enslaves an entire town to do her sitcom-oriented bidding, and by the end of the series, she's acquired the Darkhold and becomes capable of performing the darkest magic possible. As such, it was understandable fans were uneasy about where Wanda's allegiances would lie before Multiverse of Madness made its way into theaters. Would she be on the side of good with Doctor Strange and America Chavez? Or would she join the bad guys with the various demons featured throughout the trailers? Now that the film is out in theaters for all to see, we know she falls into the latter camp. While her motivation for traveling to a dimension where she can be with her children is understandable, she sinks to some truly villainous means to make those ends possible. Her descent into complete madness is a shocking twist, especially when the audience finally learns what her plan all along throughout the movie entails.
What is grief? If not love, persevering.
It doesn't take Wanda long to reveal her grand plan to Doctor Strange. She's been chasing after America Chavez for so long because she wishes to harness her multiverse-hopping abilities for her own use. You see, Wanda's been having dreams of other universes out there, where different versions of her get to live sweet domestic lives with her children. She wishes to travel into one of these other dimensions so that she can take another Wanda's place and raise her kids in peace. Such an action could lead to dire consequences, but Wanda doesn't care. She just wants her children back. To accomplish her goal, Wanda tracks America through the multiverse so that she can train her of her powers to use them for her own gain. Such a process will kill America, but Wanda doesn't care. She's made a major heel turn from the last time we've seen her, and it all appears to be a result of the Darkhold corrupting her. After all, it's not like Wanda's always been this way. One could look at her character arc in Captain America Civil War as evidence of this. In that film, she accidentally kills some people during her attempt to stop some bad guys, and she feels terrible about it. In that instance, she obviously knows the ends don't justify the means, and it kickstarts the entire conflict of the film. Suffice to say, that's not how she acts in this movie, but her turn to villainy will come as no surprise to people who know the comics Scarlet Witch.
It was fun just looking at it from a different perspective.
Wanda started as a villain in the MCU, only to turn into an Avenger. And now, in Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, she's back to being the bad guy, and she does some truly horrific things. From slaughtering sorcerers at Carmitage to killing the Illuminati, she doesn't allow anyone to get in her path to capturing America. It can naturally make the audience conflicted about how to feel about her, and that's precisely the case with her status in the Marvel Comics. She's done plenty of good throughout her comic book run, helping the Avengers and the X-Men numerous times. However, she's also caused her fair share of problems, particularly when she becomes overly emotional. This is precisely what occurred during the infamous House of M storyline, where she created an alternate reality that eliminated 98% of the world's mutants. There's also the Avengers Disassembled arc, where she orchestrated events to disband the Avengers. She did so because she learned her children never actually existed. Sound familiar? And in a state of chaos, she wanted the Avengers to know precisely how she felt. Wanda's neither fully a hero nor villain. She pretty much does what she wants, and her allegiances lie with whoever can help her attain those goals. Doctor Strange 2 presents a more vicious Wanda than anything we've seen before in a live-action setting, and is bound to unsettle audiences.
How did a video game ruin the ending of Serenity? If you've come for some of the worst twists in movie history, stick around because you're in the right place. Batman Begins got people to take the Caped Crusader seriously at the movies again, and The Dark Knight was an award-winning sensation. That's why hype was understandably huge for The Dark Knight Rises, the final film in Christopher Nolan's epic Batman trilogy. Unfortunately, the third film was in many ways a step down from its predecessors. There are several distracting plot holes, such as Bruce Wayne's inexplicable escape to Gotham after being imprisoned on the other side of the planet, though his excessive wealth could be enough explanation. There's a lot to love about The Dark Knight Rises. It's a bombastic thriller filled with excellent visuals and great performances, especially from Tom Hardy's Bane. The twists weren't great, though. The reveal that Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character's name is Robin made some people roll their eyes, but it ultimately didn't affect the plot. However, when Miranda Tate stabs Batman and reveals herself to be Ra's al Ghul's daughter Talia, who has Bane on a leash and is carrying on the legacy of the League of Shadows, it was a little harder to ignore. Upon the film's release, some fans complained that the twist was too predictable, while others argued that it undermined Bane's abilities as a supervillain. Regardless of reasoning, it's generally agreed that the ending of The Dark Knight Rises didn't exactly live up to the expectations set by its predecessors. M. Night Shyamalan is a name synonymous with twist endings. Shyamalan has had one of the most bizarre and noteworthy careers in Hollywood history. The Sixth Sense, Unbreakable, and Signs were all wildly popular, establishing him as one of the hottest directors around at the start of the millennium. A decade later, however, most of the movie-going public's goodwill towards him had evaporated thanks to critical duds like The Happening, The Last Airbender, and After Earth. What happened between the unforgettable reveal of The Sixth Sense and the cringe-inducing cheese of The Last Airbender is anyone's guess. We do know where the first signs of trouble started popping up, though. 2004's The Village. Released 2 years after Signs, The Village follows a group of 19th century Pennsylvanian townsfolk who are stalked by strange monsters that lurk in the woods. Audiences couldn't wait to see what neck-snapping twist Shyamalan had in store. But when it was revealed that the film actually takes place in the present day, and that the monsters were just the town elders in costumes, most people weren't impressed. Still, Shyamalan refuses to let bad reviews stop him from writing crazy twists. His most recent project, 2021's Old, features a similarly baffling reveal of its own. J.K. Rowling isn't the only one making things worse for the legacy of the Harry Potter franchise. The other folks behind the Fantastic Beasts movie are helping out too. The first movie in the spin-off series, in which British wizard Newt Scamander tries to recapture his escaped magical creatures in New York City, definitely has its moments. Redmayne charms in the lead role, his sidekicks are a blast, and the various Fantastic Beasts certainly live up to the film's title. However, the movie was never really about capturing billywigs and bowtruckles. Scamander and his friends have to get to the bottom of an anti-Muggle plot orchestrated by Percival Graves, the director of magical security. When Graves is apprehended, his true identity is revealed. He's actually the legendary dark wizard Grindelwald in disguise. That kind of twist might have worked in a lesser franchise, but the reveal cheapened Grindelwald as a character moving forward. Worse still, it set up a decidedly unmagical letdown of a sequel in Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. It's no surprise that a film about criminal magicians who rob the rich and give to the poor is going to have a lot of twists. With a description like that, the only twist we wouldn't see coming is a straightforward narrative. But of course, Now You See Me has plenty of twists in store. The Four Horsemen, a group of expert illusionists, rob wealthy benefactors and shower their audiences with money. FBI agent Dylan Rhodes leads the cryptic investigation into their crimes, believing them to be members of a secret society of magicians known as the Eye. It's certainly a unique idea, and the A-list cast is an excellent selling point. Unfortunately, the movie eventually starts to sag under the weight of all the fake-outs, improbable escapes, and double crosses, but none of them are nearly as ludicrous as the final reveal.
Welcome to the Eye.
Yes, Rhodes, the FBI agent hunting down the Four Horsemen, is not only a magician himself, but the son of another legendary illusionist and the mysterious mastermind behind the crew's latest epic heist. Far-fetched doesn't begin to describe this laughable development. Like many other movies on this list, Orphan has a promising start. After their child is stillborn, Kate and John Coleman decide to adopt a precocious 9-year-old girl named Esther. The thing is, Esther is far from a normal kid. Some problematic behavior might be expected of any child who's waiting for a home in the foster care system, But Esther is a different kind of troubled. She interrupts the Colemans during intimate moments and reveals an alarming level of knowledge about sexual topics. She scares the Colemans' other children by killing animals in front of them. Sister Abigail, who runs the orphanage Esther was adopted from, later informs Kate and John that tragedy always seems to follow Esther around. Thanks, sister. That would have been nice to know from the beginning. At least she let them know before Esther was able to kill her. Kate is quickly convinced that Esther is sinister, but it takes John longer to accept the malevolence behind their new daughter's behavior. John finally admits that something is off when Esther tries to seduce him, but it's pretty much too late at that point. That's when we learn that Esther isn't 9 at all, and that she isn't Esther either. She's a 33-year-old Estonian woman with a hormone disorder. The bizarre reveal certainly explains a lot, but that doesn't make it any less ridiculous. Christmas movies don't usually wow critics and are often little more than heartwarming distractions for everyone else. But a Christmas movie that takes its premise from song lyrics? Now that's a recipe for narrative disaster. Enter Last Christmas. This story follows Kate, an aspiring singer who lives with her parents after losing her job and getting thrown out of her lover's house by his partner. The one bright spot in her life is Tom, a mysterious man with whom she develops an intimate romance. After the two connect, she reveals she had a heart transplant a year earlier. One day, Kate visits Tom's apartment and discovers it's being sold. She then learns that the last owner died in a bicycle accident the previous Christmas. Kate then puts 2 and 2 together and realizes Tom is the previous owner, and when he died, she received his heart. So, he was a ghost all along. Great. After learning this, Kate tries to focus on doing good for others, as Tom would have wanted. She spends more time outside and sings a certain Wham song at a homeless shelter while reminiscing about the good times she had with her boyfriend, whom she never actually met. What were the lyrics again? Last Christmas, I gave you my heart. Get it? Yeah, we do too. John Cusack leads an excellent ensemble cast in Identity, a slasher whodunit very loosely based on Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. The film follows 10 strangers stranded in a hotel who are mysteriously killed off one by one. As the story progresses, viewers are shown flashbacks depicting important events that supposedly occurred shortly before the guests arrived. The big twist? None of this actually happened. Malcolm Rivers is a condemned serial killer due to die in less than 2 days. His lawyers try to stay the execution, leading to an 11th-hour trial in which it's revealed that Rivers has dissociative identity disorder. The hotel guest killings represent Rivers killing his different personalities. Twists that are integral to the plot, like the one in Identity, always work better than twists slapped on at the last minute to shock audiences and elevate a lousy, boring story. This one is certainly thought-provoking, but ultimately too absurd and far-fetched to stick the landing. Remember Me is a sweet but ultimately forgettable rom-com for most of its runtime. Tyler Hawkins works at the NYU bookstore and audits classes there while Allie is a student. One night, Tyler and his roommate, Aiden, are arrested by an NYPD detective named Neil after getting involved in a fight that someone else started. When Aiden discovers Neil is Allie's father, he convinces Tyler to seduce and then dump her to get revenge. Instead, Tyler and Allie predictably fall in love for real after bonding over their shared trauma and daddy issues. It turns out Tyler's brother had taken his own life years earlier, leading his father to focus on raising his sister, who struggles socially and needs support. Meanwhile, Allie reveals her mother was mugged and murdered when she was younger. By this point, some viewers might be rolling their eyes at all the cheap emotional manipulation, which uses extreme tragedy as a stand-in for more subtle character development. But that's nothing compared to what's coming next. After all of these plot threads have been resolved, Tyler looks out the window of his new office, located in the North Tower of the World Trade Center, on the morning of September 11th, 2001. It doesn't get more clumsily manipulative than that. Not unlike the Star Wars prequel trilogy, the sequels had a rocky time and divided fans. The Force Awakens was a welcome return to form for many, but too similar to A New Hope for others. The Last Jedi delighted critics with loads of fresh, thought-provoking ideas, but those same risky storytelling choices left some fans with a bad taste in their mouths. And then there's The Rise of Skywalker, which pleased almost no one. One of Episode 9's many narrative missteps was how it handled the long-running question of Rey's parentage. The Last Jedi challenged the trope that fantasy protagonists, especially in Star Wars, must have a noble lineage, after Kylo Ren tells our heroine that she's the descendant of nobodies. However, The Rise of Skywalker decided to retcon that development, revealing Rey to be a relative of one of the most fearsome figures in the galaxy far, far away, Emperor Palpatine.
You're his granddaughter. You are a Palpatine.
The filmmakers behind The Rise of Skywalker were almost certainly trying to recreate the iconic reveal from The Empire Strikes Back, but they were unable to replicate its success. Instead, the sequel trilogy serves as a cautionary tale of what happens when two filmmakers with opposing visions are forced to share a multi-billion-dollar franchise. With the release of both Iron Man and The Dark Knight, 2008 was a great year for superhero movies. Unfortunately, the ending of Peter Berg's Hancock meant that they couldn't all be winners. Will Smith plays the titular Hancock, an abrasive, alcoholic superhuman who can't remember his own secret identity. Jason Bateman plays Ray Embry, a PR specialist who volunteers to help Hancock revitalize his image after the hero saves his life. With that unique and seemingly fun premise, the pieces were all there for a recommendable one-off action comedy superhero flick. But then the second half of the movie happens, and we find out Ray's wife is also an immortal superhuman, and she's also Hancock's ex-wife. It turns out that superheroes only have powers when they're apart, and his proximity to her made him vulnerable to an attack 80 years ago, resulting in his hospitalization and amnesia. Viewers generally agreed that Hancock's two halves felt disjointed, which isn't a surprise considering that the film was stuck in development hell for 12 years. Matthew McConaughey and Anne Hathaway had perfect chemistry in Interstellar, so it was a bit of a surprise that 2019's Serenity missed the mark as much as it did. The plot sounds intriguing enough, at least on paper. Boat Captain Dill Baker is asked by his ex-wife Karen to save her and her son Patrick by murdering her abusive husband Frank. She books Frank for a ride on Dill's boat for a week, where it should be easy to toss him overboard with no witnesses. But Dill is forced to wrestle with his conscience over whether or not he should go through with it after all. So what's the big twist? Does Karen have a hidden agenda? Has Frank been dead the whole time? Is Dill secretly Grindelwald in disguise? No, and no. It turns out that Dill is a playable video game character designed by Patrick. Only after Dill completes his in-game objective does Patrick work up the courage to kill Frank in real life. In his review of the film for the New York Times, critic Wesley Morris said of the big reveal, "It's like the worst of Christopher Nolan, M. Night Shyamalan, and the condolence cards section at Walgreens."
How do you keep sensitive plot details secret? Easy. Don't give Tom Holland a script. We're joking. In fact, he's far from the only actor who spoiled a huge blockbuster. Will Smith has spent enough time in Hollywood to know that spoiling the ending of a film before it comes out is a surefire way to ruin it for an audience. But in 2007, he did just that at a news conference while talking about his film I Am Legend. As Smith began rambling about the film, co-producer and co-screenwriter Akiva Goldsman realized that he had gone too far and yelled, "Don't give away the ending!" But it was too late, and Smith had already crossed the line. The journalists present were instructed not to report on the ending of the film, so thankfully, they were able to do damage control. Since I Am Legend was based on a novel of the same name that had already been adapted multiple times, Smith might have figured that being loose-lipped about the details wasn't a big deal. After all, plenty of people had already read the book, so there weren't really any secrets to keep, right? Well, not quite. The screenwriters completely changed the ending of the film, so ideally it was supposed to be a surprise for everyone. With a franchise as huge as Star Wars, spoilers are bound to get out every once in a while. At the 2016 Star Wars celebration in London, Jiang Wen, who played Baze Malbus in the then upcoming Rogue One: A Star Wars Story, answered a question about his own character. He started off by saying that he couldn't say much about his own fate, but then he proceeded to tell everyone in attendance that Donnie Yen's character, Chirrut M'Wei, was gonna die.
And when this guy dead, I do something better.
Luckily, panel MC Gwendolyn Christie came to the rescue and managed to stop Wen from giving anything else away. While he did stick to his promise about keeping his own character's fate a secret, he did spoil another one. Whoops. It seems like he was so eager to deflect the attention from himself that he said a little too much. In 2009, Rachel McAdams starred in the film The Time Traveler's Wife, which was based on the novel of the same name. McAdams could perhaps be forgiven for assuming that the target audience for the adaptation was already familiar with the book. Of course, the plot of any film that involves time travel will almost definitely include some trippy twists and turns. And that was the case with The Time Traveler's Wife. But those twists aren't nearly as interesting when you know what's coming in advance. McAdams began revealing major plot twists during a 2009 interview with Jon Stewart on The Daily Show.
He goes forward as far as his own death. So it's just
When she realized she had said too much, she didn't try to backtrack. Instead, it just seemed like she figured she might as well run with it and keep talking. Stewart joked that he still couldn't wait to see the film, but after watching that interview, you really wouldn't need to buy a ticket.
But obviously that's not the plot.
Gwyneth Paltrow has always had trouble holding back when it comes to spoilers. Throughout her time playing Pepper Potts in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, she has been known to let key details slip before the premieres. Before the release of Avengers Endgame, she revealed a major detail about Tony Stark and Pepper Potts' lives after the tragic events of Avengers Infinity War. And in doing so, she gave away a lot more than she probably realized. In an interview for the official Infinity War magazine, Paltrow was asked about Pepper's relationship with Tony. She answered, "Pepper and Tony have had a real long journey together. She obviously starts as his dutiful assistant, and then the relationship evolves. And now this decade later, they're married, and they have a child." Yeah, that last part was a big spoiler for fans eagerly awaiting Endgame. At the time, Pepper and Tony were a galaxy apart following the events of Avengers Infinity War and had only briefly talked about having children.
So you woke up and thought that we were
expecting?
Yeah.
Yes?
No.
Fans had no idea they would be reunited and would have a child after the time jump in Endgame. What's most surprising is that the official magazine printed the quote in the first place. Michael Keaton dropped the mother of all spoilers while promoting Tim Burton's 1989 Batman film. During an interview with David Letterman, the two started delving into Batman's origin story and his connection with the Joker. In the midst of their conversation, Keaton seemingly forgot that the audience was there for a second, because he got a bit carried away describing the plot.
I witnessed Batman. Bruce Wayne witnesses the murder of his parents when he's a kid.
And the Joker had done that?
Yeah, but he doesn't know it till later.
I see.
I'm kind of blowing the plot here.
This, of course, was not an element of existing Batman mythology, invented as a plot twist for the '89 film. Needless to say, this was a shock for both Letterman and his audience. But by that point, the damage had been done, and the audience was probably a little disappointed. Fortunately, the spoiler clearly didn't affect the success of the film, which went on to make $411 million worldwide, revitalize the comic industry, and help define superhero movies as we know them. For some reason, it seems exceptionally difficult for the cast of superhero films to keep quiet about key plot points. Just look at Jason Momoa's slip-up on The Late Late Show with James Corden. While promoting their new film Aquaman, Momoa and his co-star Yahya Abdul-Mateen II made an appearance on the show, and they let the audience in on a few things they weren't really supposed to know. Momoa started talking about the relationship between their two characters and had a slip of the tongue.
But then there's a whole emotional scene with him and his father because I kill his dad.
Momoa went on to joke that this is why he always has Abdul-Mateen answer the questions. Maybe if he'd been in character as Aquaman, he'd have been more tight-lipped about the plot.
Something trident.
See? That's better. The ending of Avengers Infinity War was gut-wrenching for Marvel fans. When Thanos snapped his fingers, half of all life in the universe disappeared. But if you caught a particular Good Morning America interview with Don Cheadle and Mark Ruffalo that aired almost a year before the movie came out, you might have seen it coming.
Wait till you see this next one. Everybody dies.
Dude.
Not everybody. No. Is that...
It's true that Ruffalo wasn't too specific with the spoiler, so it didn't seem too memorable at the time. But some fans probably did start to suspect that depressing finale. There's no doubt that some of them fully expected many of the Avengers to perish. Of course, having some time to steel yourself emotionally might have made it easier to accept your favorite character's demise. So, maybe we should have thanked Mark Ruffalo.
You're marginally better than Tom Holland, but that's it. Yeah. I taught Tom Holland.
Tom Holland is the undisputed king of Marvel movie spoilers. The actor has dropped so many spoilers during interviews that, at this point, it's become a running joke. But Holland is so enthusiastic and endearing that it's hard to feel annoyed at him for his habit of letting spoilers slip. Before a screening of Avengers Infinity War in Los Angeles, Holland made an appearance and shouted, "I'm alive!" When the audience seemed confused, Holland's mistake slowly dawned on him. He was under the impression that they had just seen the film and knew his character would die, but it hadn't started yet. Whoops! Jiang Wen might have spoiled the fate of one character in Rogue One, but many years before that, David Prowse ruined the biggest plot twist in Star Wars history. When the man behind Darth Vader's mask was interviewed about The Empire Strikes Back in 1978, 2 years before it was even released, he openly shared one of the most shocking moments in any of the Star Wars films. Prowse was at a fan meetup when he dropped a bomb regarding Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader's relationship, saying, "Father can't kill son, son can't kill father." Thankfully, his reveal was only printed in a single local newspaper article. And clearly, not many people read the original article, because the vast majority of fans were still totally caught off guard. If you don't recognize the name Tyler Nelson, there's a reason for that. He put a stop to his acting career when it had barely begun. Nelson was cast as an extra in Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And naturally, he was over the moon about the opportunity to be a part of an Indiana Jones film. His role was apparently to play a Russian dancing after Indy was captured. His involvement got some attention in his hometown, and a local newspaper interviewed him to get the scoop on the film. But instead of simply sticking to the story of how he ended up on set, he started revealing the entire plot of the film. He might as well have handed the reporter a script. He completely violated his non-disclosure agreement, and as a result, he faced some serious consequences. Once word got back to the studio that Nelson had blabbed, Steven Spielberg's spokesman, Marvin Levy, commented, "Who knows whether that particular person will ever work in this town again." Nelson was promptly cut from the film, and his mistake appears to have cost him a future in acting. Spider-Man: No Way Home features several returning actors from prior films in the franchise, including Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield as returning Spider-Man.
You okay? Oh, it's my back. It's kind of stiff from all the swinging, I guess.
While Marvel's attempts at keeping a lid on the film's biggest comebacks were always going to be tough considering how many people were involved, Alfred Molina did them no favors. The returning Dr. Octopus actor spilled the beans more than a year before the film's release. The rumor started when Molina was spotted on the set of the production, and the question came up as to his involvement during an interview with Variety. Assuming that published reports of his appearance had already made it official, the actor wasn't shy about it. He said, "When we were shooting it, we were all under orders not to talk about it, because it was supposed to be some great big secret. But, you know, it's all over the internet. I actually described myself as the worst kept secret in Hollywood."
Up here! He's up there! It's the guy from the bridge!
A year after the film's release, though, Molina told the Radio Times that the studio was pretty miffed that he confirmed his appearance. He said, "Kevin Feige was on a red carpet somewhere and someone asked him about some Marvel movie, and apparently he got a bit snippy and turned around and said, 'Ask Alfred Molina.' So I got into a little bit of hot water." The Star Wars prequel trilogy was among the first major movie series to be produced in the era of internet spoilers. As fan communities popped up in the mid to late 90s, it became harder and harder to prevent plot leaks from reaching the masses. But while Lucasfilm surely took security seriously to prevent spoilers, they couldn't stop one of their own stars, Samuel L. Jackson, from giving away his own character's fate. Jackson played the lightsaber-wielding warrior Mace Windu in the trilogy. He was also one of the biggest actors involved in the trilogy and was always being asked about his part in the films. And in one particularly revealing interview with Now Playing magazine, he talked a little bit too much when asked about what part his character had to play in the third prequel. Jackson bluntly told the magazine, "Dying, yeah, like all the rest of the Jedi. I can't tell you the specifics, but yeah, it's an awesome death."
So the prophecy says.
Admittedly, most fans probably knew this was likely given the backstory established in earlier films, but it was a startling admission from an otherwise tight-lipped production and sent fans into a frenzy. When your big blockbuster movie is based on a well-loved and widely read comic book universe, it might be hard to keep all of the story a secret. The movie's biggest plot points might be common knowledge among comic book readers, but that doesn't mean wider audiences know what's coming. Such was the case for X-Men Apocalypse, the third film in the relaunched franchise. Fan favorite Peter Maximoff, aka Quicksilver, returns from the previous film, and one of the major twists is the revelation that he's the son of longtime X-Men villain Magneto, a fact that comic fans might have already guessed.
Are you gonna tell him?
Might. One day.
Unfortunately, actor Evan Peters just couldn't keep the secret for everyone else while talking to Joe Blow about his character's place in the film. He said, "I've learned that Magneto's my father at this point. He knows who he is now, so he is trying to find him. He's been searching for him. It's been 10 years and he hasn't found him, and then something happens." Ultimately, of course, X-Men Apocalypse wasn't the popular, acclaimed blockbuster that the previous films had been, and the spoiled revelation wasn't something that wound up ruining the movie. Thankfully, though, Peters remained much more tight-lipped when it came to his return in Marvel's WandaVision in 2021. You might not expect a modest, low-budget character drama about a man and his dog to be the subject of a major spoiler discussion, but here we are. Starring Channing Tatum, the 2022 film Dog was inspired by the actor's own life and a road trip he took with his dying dog in 2018. The film doesn't include any truly dramatic plot twists, stunning revelations, or major mind-benders. In fact, it's a fairly lighthearted, family-friendly tale with a happy ending. But that's exactly why Tatum himself gave away the ending before it released. In a kind of reverse spoiler, Tatum talked about what didn't happen in the movie, and it wasn't a mistake or slip-up. In fact, it was in an attempt to attract more people to the film, considering the history of animal movies like The Call of the Wild and Marley and Me. Both were advertised as upbeat family films and end as tearjerkers. As a result, Tatum wanted to assure audiences that Dog would not conclude with a depressing or morose ending.
It's a good ending, so everyone knows.
Yeah, there's no...
Yep, see, everybody's like, oh.
When it comes to tragic character deaths, few can top the emotional tour de force that audiences endure in Logan, the third solo film for Wolverine, played by Hugh Jackman. His 9th appearance in the role, it was highly publicized as the last time Jackman would wield the adamantium claws, and the rumor mill was spinning that Logan wouldn't survive the events of the movie. Very loosely adapted from the epic comic book miniseries Old Man Logan, the film might not have killed off its hero had it stuck closer to its source material. But in the end, with Jackman insistent on retiring the role, it indeed ends with the death of the title character.
This is what it feels like.
But while many were expecting Logan's demise, it most assuredly was not a certainty going into the release of the film. That is, not until Jackman himself decided to say it rather plainly in an interview with Entertainment Weekly. The interview was published the day after the film's release, but for everyone who couldn't make it to the premiere, it was a huge spoiler. Jackman told EW, "As soon as I saw the script, I got it. Logan is someone who's most scared of intimacy, and so he wants to be alone and do things for himself. The idea that, in the end, he must give his life to save someone else, I thought that was really powerful." While his casting was announced all the way back in 2007, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson finally starred as the titular anti-hero in Black Adam when it was released in 2022. Though it lacked Shazam, the heroes whose comic books originally spawned Black Adam back in the 1940s, the film still had plenty of surprises. This includes the Justice Society of America, an iconic superhero team featuring heroes like Dr. Fate and Hawkman. But it also included a jaw-dropping post-credit scene that had to be seen to be believed, as Henry Cavill reprised his role as the Man of Steel in a sequence that set up a future clash of titans. The only problem was The Rock himself had already spoiled the scene in the days leading up to the film. While promoting the movie on the red carpet of the film's world premiere, more than a week before its wide release, Johnson talked to Entertainment Weekly and decided to let the cat out of the bag when asked about the presence of Superman in the film.
We've all been fighting for this moment, so I will say this. Welcome home.
Though he didn't say it explicitly, Entertainment Weekly knew exactly what he was saying and tweeted out the clip with the announcement that Henry Cavill had returned as Superman and was back in the DCEU. As we all know now, of course, that didn't last. Star Wars Revenge of the Sith wasn't the last major blockbuster movie that Samuel L. Jackson wound up spoiling in his effort to promote his next big flick. Nearly 15 years later in 2019, Jackson starred in Captain Marvel, a prequel to the MCU set in the 1990s. In addition to introducing cosmic hero Carol Danvers, it shed new light on the history of Jackson's Nick Fury. Digitally de-aged, Jackson was a major part of the story, which revealed Fury's first meeting with a superhero and how he conceived of the Avengers Initiative. But that wasn't all, and one of the most fun revelations was spoiled by Jackson himself, across 2 separate interviews before the movie even released. It all started while Jackson was speaking with Entertainment Tonight in January of 2019. He recklessly revealed that the film would tell the story behind Fury's famous eye patch, but didn't elaborate on how he'd lose it. That detail would come while he was being interviewed for the playlist just days before the film landed in theaters. Though it may not have been entirely his fault. Having seen the film ahead of its official release, the interviewer directly addressed how he lost the eye. Well, Jackson went right along and talked about it, even addressing rumors that he doesn't like cats, an allegation he denied.
I'm gonna keep giving him all the loves and hugs that he needs.
At the time of its rollout, one of the biggest stars in Phase 1 of the MCU was Natalie Portman in 2011's Thor. The A-list actor had just won an Oscar earlier that year and starred opposite Chris Hemsworth as Jane Foster, a scientist who discovers the Asgardian prince after he's banished to Earth. But following a bad experience on the sequel, Thor: The Dark World, Portman swore off working for Marvel. Some years later, the prospect of working with the director Taika Waititi was enough to lure her back to the MCU for Thor: Love and Thunder. But in her excitement, she also spoiled a major plot twist before the movie came out. While it was well known thanks to trailers that her character Jane Foster would be given the powers of Thor, what audiences who weren't comic readers probably didn't see coming was that Foster is stricken with terminal cancer, and her powers allow her to stave off her own death. Unfortunately, Portman went a little too far in talking about all that while speaking with Hindustan Times while promoting the film a month early. She's new at it, and also keeps reverting to human form. So there's kind of danger always that, like, it might be her last moment getting to experience that. But apparently, Portman realized her snafu because she immediately acknowledged the cardinal sin she just committed and added, "I don't know, that might be a big spoiler. Sorry." When it was announced that Kang the Conqueror would be the villain of the third Ant-Man film, speculation went into overdrive on what the film might be about. Paul Rudd remained cagey on the details. But his co-star Evangeline Lilly let the excitement of her return get the better of her. Eager to share her prep work on the film ahead of the movie's production, the actor took to social media, posting images for her legions of followers. What they briefly saw was the front cover of the film's screenplay. And while it wasn't enough to reveal any of the script's secrets, who she tagged gave the game away. Because in addition to tagging her known co-stars, she also curiously tagged Corey Stoll. The actor who had co-starred in the first film in the series as the villain Yellow Jacket had not been officially announced as a member of the cast. And when the media got wind of her post, the rumor mill immediately fired up. Her rushed deletion of the post only added fuel to the fire. As many suspected, Stoll did wind up returning in the threequel. Thankfully though, Lilly never let slip that his character had been transformed into the comic book villain MODOK, a secret that the studio was clearly saving for the film's release.